Section 1. Introduction. The world that was always bigger than we thought. There is something particular about the world of Pokémon that has never quite let go of the people who grew up inside it. Not just the games themselves, though the games are extraordinary. Not just the cards, or the cartoons, or the movies, or the merchandise that lined every shelf of every toy store for decades. It is something beneath all of that, something quieter, something that lives in the spaces between what you are shown and what you are allowed to imagine. When you first stepped into Pallet Town as a child, the world presented to you was simple and bright. Your mother stood at the bottom of the stairs. The television hummed in the corner. A gentle melody played, one of the most recognizable pieces of music ever written for a video game, and the whole world felt soft and possible. You were 10 years old. You had a bag, a dream, and a starter Pokémon. Everything was going to be fine. But then you walked into the tall grass without thinking, and the world reminded you it had teeth. The first wild encounter in a Pokémon game is always a little startling. The music changes. The screen shifts. Something looks at you from across the field with blank, unreadable eyes. And for just a moment, even as a child, you feel something you will not be able to name for years. You feel the particular chill of a world that does not care about you. A world that existed before you arrived, and will go on existing long after you leave. That feeling, that sense of something older and larger breathing just beneath the surface, is what Pokémon fan theories are made of. For as long as there have been Pokémon games, there have been people who could not stop asking questions the games never bothered to answer. What happened to the generation of adults who should be running this world? Why does one small town have a tower full of dead Pokémon? Why does a child's skull fit perfectly over the face of a small, grieving creature? Why does the strange man at the gym talk about war like he still has shrapnel in his chest? The games never tell you. They present these details quietly, with no fanfare, and then move on. And that silence is an invitation. Over the decades since Pokémon Red and Blue were first released in Japan in 1996, a vast and deeply creative tradition has grown up around these questions. Some theories are simple and elegant, the kind that, once you hear them, make the original game feel richer and more intentional. Some theories are dark and complex, weaving together dozens of small details into something that reframes everything you thought you knew about a world you loved as a child. And some theories are legendary, stories that have been told and retold so many times that they have taken on a life of their own, existing somewhere between fan fiction and folklore, becoming myths about a mythology. This video is about all of them. We are going to take our time. There is no rush here. Think of this as a long, quiet evening where we sit together and go through every great Pokémon theory, one by one, carefully, with attention and care. We are going to talk about why each theory exists, what evidence supports it, what the games themselves seem to hint at, and what it tells us about the world we have all spent so many hours inside. Some of what we discuss will be officially confirmed. Some of it sits in that comfortable gray zone that the creators have neither confirmed nor denied, which means it is alive, which means it belongs to us. And some of it is pure speculation, beautiful, carefully constructed speculation, the kind that says more about human imagination than it does about any one fictional world. Before we begin, it is worth saying something about why fan theories matter at all, because they do matter. They are not frivolous. The act of asking questions about a fictional world is actually a profound form of engagement. When you look at Pokémon and ask why there are no adults in this world, you are doing the same thing historians do when they look at a cultural artifact and ask what it tells us about the people who made it. You are reading between the lines. You are treating the text as something worth taking seriously. And Pokémon is worth taking seriously. It is one of the most successful media franchises in human history. It has shaped the childhoods of multiple generations across nearly every country on Earth. The world it created is not just a backdrop for a game mechanic. It is a fully realized place with its own ecology, its own history, its own grief, its own strange beauty. The people who make Pokémon have always known this. They have always hidden things in the margins, knowing that some players would find them, and that some of those players would never stop thinking about what they found. We are those players, and tonight, we are going to honor every detail they left for us. So, settle in, get comfortable. This is going to take a while, and I mean that as a promise, not a warning. We are going to start at the very beginning, with the theory that might be the most elegantly constructed argument in the entire history of Pokémon fan speculation. We are going to talk about two creatures who are, in many ways, the heart of the entire world. We are going to talk about Mew and Ditto, and what it means when a perfect being makes a mistake it cannot correct. But before we do, wherever you are watching this, whether it is the middle of the night and you are in bed with headphones in, or a lazy afternoon on the couch, or a long commute with nothing else to do, drop a comment and tell me. Tell me what time it is and where you are watching from. There is something quietly wonderful about knowing that people all over the world are sitting in different rooms, in different time zones, thinking about the same thing at the same time. And if you find yourself drawn into this world we are about to spend a few hours in together, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps, and there is a great deal more where this came from. All right, let us begin. Section 2. Ditto, Mew, and the Science of Failure. There is a particular kind of elegance to the best fan theories, the ones that do not feel invented so much as discovered, the ones where you hear the argument and something inside you shifts, and you think, yes, that was always true, I just did not know it yet. The Ditto-Mew theory is one of those. It begins, as many of the best theories do, with a creature that everyone knows but nobody ever really thought about. Ditto is one of the most recognizable Pokémon in existence. It has appeared in every mainline game since the very beginning. It is a small, amorphous blob of pink or purple, perpetually slightly melted looking, with two tiny dots for eyes and a curve that might be a smile. It is, at first glance, charming and unremarkable. But Ditto is not unremarkable. Ditto is, arguably, one of the most mysterious and significant creatures in the entire Pokémon world. And once you start to look at the details, really look at them, it becomes very difficult to explain Ditto without also explaining something that changes the entire mythology of the franchise. Let us start with what Ditto actually is. Ditto's sole ability, its only move, its entire identity, is transformation. It can become any Pokémon it has ever seen. It copies the form, the moves, the statistics. It does not just imitate, it becomes. For a brief time, looking at a Ditto that is transformed, you would not be able to tell it from the real thing. The transformation is perfect, or nearly so. Nearly so, because there is one thing Ditto cannot copy. There has always been one thing. When a Ditto transforms, if you look carefully at its face, you will still see the same two small dots, the same faint curve of a mouth. The expression does not change. Ditto can take any shape, any power, any ability, but it cannot mask its own face. It cannot fully become something else. It is always, underneath everything, still Ditto. Hold that thought. Now, let us talk about Mew. Mew is, in the original lore of the Pokémon world, the ancestor of all Pokémon. The Pokédex describes Mew as containing the genetic code of every Pokémon that has ever existed. It is the original, the template from which everything else was derived. Mew is shy, playful, extraordinarily rare. It is powerful in ways that resist easy categorization. It can learn any move. It can transform. It drifts through the world like a secret, appearing only when it chooses to be seen. Mew and Ditto share something that no other Pokémon in the original 151 share. They are the only two Pokémon whose sole natural move is transform. That is not a coincidence that the theory ignores. That coincidence is the entire foundation of the argument. Now, here is where the evidence starts to compound. In the original Pokémon Red and Blue, and then again in Pokémon Yellow, Ditto appears in exactly two locations in the entire world. It appears in the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island, a ruined laboratory where human scientists once conducted research so disturbing that it drove them away and left the building abandoned. And it appears in Cerulean Cave, the most restricted location in the entire game, the place you are only allowed to enter after defeating every gym leader and becoming champion, the place where the most powerful wild Pokémon in the game resides. These are not random locations. These are, specifically, the places associated with the most significant genetic experiments ever conducted in the Pokémon world. The Pokémon Mansion is, famously, the site where Mewtwo was created. The journals left behind in that crumbling building tell a story that is, even filtered through the limited text of a Game Boy game, genuinely unsettling. Scientists found a Mew in Guyana. They extracted cells. They amplified the genetic material, forced it to mutate, pushed it past what nature had intended. What they created was not Mew. It was something that looked like Mew, in the same way that a scar looks like skin. It occupies the same space, but the texture is wrong. Mewtwo was powerful beyond anything they had anticipated, and also in tremendous pain. And the pain became rage, and the laboratory was destroyed. That is where Ditto is found, in the wreckage of those experiments, crawling through the ruined corridors of a building where scientists tried to replicate a miracle and partially failed. The theory asks, what if Ditto is what happens when you fail completely? The argument goes like this. The scientists who created Mewtwo did not do so on their first attempt. Of course they did not. The process of extracting Mew's genetic code, amplifying it, and shaping it into something stable and viable would have required hundreds of experiments, probably thousands. The successful experiments, in varying degrees, produced Mewtwo. But what about the ones that were not successful? What happened to the cells that were extracted from Mew and then failed to differentiate properly? What happened to the genetic material that could not hold a stable form, that retained the transformative fluid quality of Mew's DNA without ever developing the structure needed to become something distinct? What you would get, the theory argues, is a creature that is all potential and no resolution. A creature with Mew's ability to become anything, but without Mew's ability to be something. A creature that transforms because transformation is all it has, because it never developed a settled self, a fixed form, an identity that was its own. It can wear the face of anything, but behind every face it wears, it is still just the raw material of something that was almost Mew and never quite got there. The evidence does not stop there. Mew and Ditto share the same base stat total, 100 in every single category, the exact same number. This is not how Pokémon stats are typically distributed. Different Pokémon have very different stat spreads, emphasizing different things. For two Pokémon to share not just the same total, but the same distribution across every category is, statistically, extraordinary. They are also both pink, or rather, they are both a soft, rosy lavender pink. In their shiny forms, both Mew and Ditto turn the same shade of pale blue. No other Pokémon in the original roster matches this particular color scheme in both standard and shiny forms. Their weight. Mew weighs 8.8 pounds in the Pokédex. Ditto weighs 8.8 pounds. In the entire Pokémon world, they are among a very small group that share this precise figure. And then there is behavior. Mew is described as possessing the genetic code of every Pokémon. Ditto's Pokédex entries, which change from game to game but maintain a consistent theme, describe it as capable of reconstituting its cellular structure to match any life form. The language used to describe how Ditto works is functionally identical to the language used to describe why Mew is special. They are doing the same thing, at the cellular level. They are accessing the same set of biological possibilities, but Mew does it with grace and intention, while Ditto does it reflexively, helplessly, because it has nothing else. There is something quietly heartbreaking about that reading of Ditto when you sit with it for a moment. Here is this creature, found in the ruins of a laboratory, shuffling through the halls where something terrible was attempted. It has the DNA of the most wondrous being in the entire world. It has, encoded somewhere in its formless body, the blueprint for every creature that has ever lived. And it cannot access any of that potential for its own sake. It can only copy what it sees in front of it. It cannot become something on its own terms, cannot develop a self from the inside out, because whatever process was supposed to produce that self was interrupted or corrupted before it could complete. When Ditto transforms, it keeps its own face, that small, unchanging expression. 2 dots in a curve, a face that does not change no matter what form surrounds it. The theory suggests that this is not a cute quirk of game design. It is a metaphor. Ditto is a being with no self to speak of, wearing every self it has ever encountered, and the only thing that remains consistent, the only thing that is unambiguously its own, is a face so simple it barely qualifies as a face at all. The theory, in its most complete form, also addresses why Ditto is so common as a breeding partner in later games. Every Pokémon in the modern games can breed with Ditto, regardless of species or gender. Ditto is the universal donor, the biological connector that makes cross-species reproduction possible within the game mechanics. If Ditto genuinely carries Mew's complete genetic sequence, if it is at its core a corrupted fragment of the origin of all life, then it makes a strange, sorrowful sense that it can interface with anything. It does not belong to any one category of life, because it belongs, in some broken way, to all of them. The creators have never confirmed this theory. They are quite careful about what they choose to confirm. But the official lore of the Pokémon world has, over the years, continued to place Ditto in locations adjacent to genetic experimentation. In the Alola games, in the lab environments of Galar, in the wild areas near research stations. Ditto keeps turning up in the places where people are trying to do what the Cinnabar Island scientists tried to do, not always succeeding, sometimes leaving something unintended behind. And Mew, ancient, playful, perfectly self-contained, drifts through a world where a small pink creature shuffles through every corridor it visits, wearing other faces, carrying a genetic legacy it can never quite use. It is a beautiful theory. It is the kind of theory that makes the original games feel like they contain something they were not originally designed to contain, which is, perhaps, the highest compliment a fan theory can receive. And it is just the beginning, because now we need to talk about something smaller and sadder. We need to talk about a Pokémon wearing a skull, and what that skull used to belong to, and why a Pokémon that should not exist according to the rules of its own world keeps showing up to take care of a child that is not its own. Section 3. The Kubona Kangaskhan Tragedy. Some theories are built from careful logical argument and statistical analysis. Others are built from something simpler and more immediate, from the gut feeling that something is wrong, that the world is hiding a grief it does not know how to speak about directly. The Kubone Kangaskhan theory is the second kind. It begins with what you see when you first encounter Kubone in the wild. Kubone is a small bipedal Pokémon, brown, dinosaur-adjacent, roughly the height and shape of something you might expect to find in a rocky desert environment. It carries a bone as a weapon. It wears a skull on its head as a helmet. That skull is not its own skull. It is too large. It sits over Kubone's face like a mask rather than fitting the contours of its actual head. Nobody in the Pokémon world seems to know what species the skull originally belonged to. The Pokédex, in the original games, is remarkably specific about Kubone's emotional state. It is a Pokémon that mourns constantly. It weeps for its dead mother. It looks at the moon and cries because the moon reminds it of her face. It fights with uncharacteristic ferocity because its grief has nowhere else to go. A small creature in an oversized skull, crying for a mother it has lost. That is what Kubone is. The question the theory asks is the simplest possible question you can ask about this. Whose skull is it wearing? The obvious answer, the answer the theory builds on, is Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan is another Pokémon introduced in Generation 1, a large bipedal marsupial resembling a dinosaur crossed with a kangaroo. It carries a young Kangaskhan in its pouch at all times. Kangaskhan is one of the most fiercely maternal Pokémon in the entire franchise. Its Pokédex entries emphasize over and over how ferociously protective it is of its young, how it will fight without hesitation, how it has never been observed in the wild without a joey in its pouch. The baby Kangaskhan, the one in the pouch, resembles Kubone in a specific and remarkable way. The same basic body shape, the same proportions, the same coloring, and notably, the baby Kangaskhan in the pouch has a round head of a specific size and shape. A size and shape that would, if it were a skull separated from the flesh around it, fit quite precisely over Kubone's own head. The theory goes like this. A mother Kangaskhan dies in the wild, leaving her joey behind. The joey, too young to survive without its mother, is found, or perhaps emerges, in a state of shock and grief. It takes its mother's skull, not in a ghoulish way, or not only in a ghoulish way, but as a comfort, as a connection, as the only part of her it has left. It wears the skull as something between a helmet and a memorial. It cries because it is alone, and because the skull it wears smells like her, and feels like her, and is all that is left of her. This is why Kubone cries at the moon. Kangaskhan is a nocturnal Pokémon, and the moon is associated with its movements. The joey has learned to look up when the night is bright, expecting its mother. The moon reminds it of her face because her face, round and full, used to appear above the pouch when the world was dark and the stars were out. There is supporting evidence woven through the games in ways that feel almost uncomfortably deliberate once you start looking. In the original games, when Cubone evolves into Marowak, it does not grow dramatically larger or change its overall morphology in the way that many Pokémon evolutions do. It grows somewhat larger, gains a second bone to wield, but its essential form stays the same. It remains a creature wearing a skull. The skull fits it better. Marowak is large enough now that the skull looks more like armor than a mask. But it has never, in any game, removed that skull. It has never moved past the grief enough to take it off. There is also the matter of the Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town. Lavender Town is a small, quiet, deeply unsettling town in the original Kanto region. It is built around a tower, a multi-story structure used as a graveyard for Pokémon who have died. You learn, as you progress through the game, that the tower is haunted. This is expected. What is less expected is that one of the floors of that tower is haunted specifically by a ghost-type Pokémon who attacks you not out of malice, but out of grief. This Pokémon is identified, eventually, as a dead Marowak, a mother Marowak, killed by Team Rocket, whose child was taken from her. The game shows you, at this point in the story, something that it does not explain. It shows you a dead Marowak, still fighting to protect a child she is no longer alive to protect. And it shows you that her child, though this is heavily implied rather than stated directly, became a Cubone. It became the small creature with the oversized skull and the perpetual grief. The skull the Cubone in Lavender Town is wearing belongs to the ghost that is still fighting to protect it. There is one more layer to this theory, one that takes it from emotionally resonant to structurally fascinating. In the code of the original Pokémon games, in the areas of the game files that correspond to evolutionary chains and species relationships, data miners and researchers have found traces of an evolutionary path that was apparently designed and then removed before the game was released. The chain was, Cubone could have evolved into Kangaskhan. Think about what that means in the context of the theory. The baby Kangaskhan who survives its mother's death, who takes her skull, who grieves and grows and fights and carries her memory through every battle and every wild encounter. Who, if it lives long enough, if it heals enough, if it finds something to protect, perhaps its own egg, its own young, its own reason to move forward, becomes something that can finally put down the grief or carry it differently. Becomes a mother in its own right, one fierce enough to fight anything that threatens the small warm weight in its own pouch. Becomes, eventually, a Kangaskhan. The cycle was apparently in the game at some point. The designers, for reasons that are not documented, removed it. They separated Cubone and Kangaskhan into two distinct evolutionary lines with no stated connection. And in doing so, they left Cubone permanently arrested in the first stage of grief. Permanently small, permanently wearing the skull, permanently crying at the moon. That might have been accidental. It might have been a practical decision, a simplification of a mechanic that was becoming too complicated. But it is also possible, and this is where the theory becomes, I think, genuinely poetic, that the removal was intentional, that the designers wanted Cubone to stay where it was, grieving, wearing the skull, because some grief does not evolve into something else. Some loss stays exactly where it is, does not transform into wisdom or strength or a new beginning. It just stays. The skull stays on. The crying does not stop. In the later games, in Sun and Moon, set in a different region called Alola, there is an Alolan variant of Marowak, a Cubone that evolved in a different environment. It is a fire type and a ghost type simultaneously. It set itself ablaze in a sense. The grief became a fire. The fire became part of the armor. The skull is still on, but it is on fire now. That is, depending on your interpretation, either a beautiful image of grief transformed into something powerful and strange, or the saddest image in the entire franchise. A creature that has been mourning so long, in such intensity, that the mourning has burned itself into a permanent feature of its identity. It is not moving past it. It is becoming it, becoming the fire and the ghost and the bone all at once. Some people read the Alolan Marowak as healing. Some people read it as a creature that has been lost in grief so thoroughly that there is no longer a clear boundary between the Pokémon and the pain. I will let you decide which interpretation you find more useful. What neither interpretation disputes is this. The theory that Kubone is a baby Kangaskhan mourning its mother is not just emotionally resonant, it is structurally consistent with everything the original games tell us about both Pokémon, it is supported by the removed evolutionary data, and it creates a depth of meaning that makes the world of Pokémon feel like it was built around genuine feeling rather than just game design. There are bones in this world that tell stories. There are skulls being worn by creatures who have not yet learned how to take them off. We are going to return to the theme of death and war in a moment, because there is something larger happening in the background of the original Pokémon world. Something that explains not just one dead mother, but an entire missing generation. An entire world shaped by violence and loss that no one in the game ever fully explains, but that every detail quietly confirms. We are going to talk about the Great Pokémon War. Section 4. The Great Pokémon War. There is a detail in Pokémon Red and Blue that most players noticed without registering. It is the kind of thing you absorb without processing, store somewhere in the back of your awareness as slightly odd but not worth examining, and then file away as you continue through the game toward the next badge, the next route, the next challenge. The detail is this. There are almost no adult men in Kanto. Pallet Town has 10 residents, roughly speaking, a few houses, a few people. There is a professor. There is your mother. There is a rival and his mother, who you almost never see. The town that should be a starting point for childhood adventure is nearly empty of the generation that should be in charge. This is true throughout the entire region. As you travel from town to town, through Viridian City, through Pewter, through Cerulean, through Vermilion, through Lavender, through Celadon, through Fuchsia, through Saffron, through Cinnabar, the pattern holds. Women, elderly men, children, and young adults are present. But the fathers, the middle-aged men, the generation that would be in their 30s and 40s if the world were functioning normally, they are not there. They are conspicuously, quietly absent. The few adult men who do appear are either ancient or affiliated with Team Rocket or stationed at gyms and training facilities. They are soldiers, criminals, or teachers. They are defined by their function in a military or quasi-military structure. They are not fathers. They are not farmers or shopkeepers or postmen or the ordinary economic infrastructure of a functioning society. Something happened to the men of Kanto. Lieutenant Surge is the gym leader in Vermilion City, and he is, in certain ways, the most significant character in the entire Pokémon theory ecosystem. He is an enormous American man who runs the electric-type gym, and he will tell you something, when you speak to him, that the game appears to assume you will not think about too hard. He will say, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing something that happened a long time ago in a place very far away, "Electric Pokémon saved me during the war." The war. There is a war in the history of the Pokémon world. Lieutenant Surge experienced it. He used electric-type Pokémon during it, probably as weapons, as generators, as communications equipment, as battlefield support. He survived it, which the phrasing implies many of his contemporaries did not. And then he came back, and he built a gym, and he stands in the middle of it surrounded by electric fences and soldiers turned trainers, and he tells every child who walks through his door that when they are grown, they will understand what he means. This is the theory that has come to be called the Great Pokémon War, though the game never gives it a name. It is the theory that explains the missing men, the hollowed-out towns, the odd preponderance of young widows and elderly people filling roles that should belong to a middle generation that simply is not there. The timeline goes roughly like this. Some years before the events of the games, scholars of the theory debate exactly how many years, but most estimates put it at somewhere between 15 and 25 years. There was a large-scale war in the Pokémon world. Given the structure of the games, which appear to center on the Japanese islands as a model for the regional geography, this war almost certainly involved conflict between the different regions, or between factions within a region, or both. It was a war in which Pokémon were used as weapons and tools and companions on the battlefield. The men of an entire generation went to that war. A significant portion of them did not come back. The ones who did come back are the ones you encounter in the games. Lieutenant Surge, who has never fully separated himself from the military context of his life, who surrounds himself with soldiers, who still carries the bearing and the reflexes and the hardness of a battlefield veteran, who tells a 10-year-old about a war because he cannot quite stop thinking about it. The old men in the gatehouses and the routes, who are too old to have fought, but who remember what it looked like from the outside. The gym leaders, many of whom have a certain controlled intensity that reads less like hobbyist passion and more like disciplined expertise. The expertise of people who have used Pokémon in situations where losing was not just an inconvenience. And then there is the generation that was born into the aftermath. The player character in Pokémon Red and Blue is 10 years old. Their father is, famously, never mentioned, never seen, never acknowledged in any way. This is not unusual among the protagonists of the Pokémon games. None of them have fathers who appear in the story, and the games are remarkably consistent about this across generations and regions. The theory does not argue that every absent father is a casualty of the war, though it does argue that many of them are. The player character was born into a world where the war was just ending or had just ended, and where the shape of that world, the empty houses, the quiet towns, the mothers who are home, and the fathers who are not, was the normal they grew up with. Pokémon Red and Blue are not set during a war. They are set in the peace that came after it, and the peace has that particular quality that peace often has when it comes on the heels of catastrophic violence. It is quiet in a way that sometimes feels like exhaustion. The towns are small. People do not move much. There are ruins everywhere. The Pokémon Mansion, the destroyed laboratory, the crumbling sections of the Safari Zone, the Pokémon Tower full of the dead. The world is recovering from something, slowly, in the way that places do when too many people have been lost too quickly. Team Rocket fits perfectly into this reading of the world. Team Rocket, in the original games, is the primary criminal organization, a syndicate that steals Pokémon, exploits them, sells them, and uses them for profit and power. Their leader is Giovanni, who is also, notably, a gym leader, the Viridian City gym leader, the last gym you face before the Pokémon League. He is a man who holds both legitimate institutional power and criminal power simultaneously, which is the kind of double structure that tends to emerge in the vacuum after a war, when the normal legal and social structures have been too damaged to fully reassert themselves. The theory argues that Team Rocket is, in essence, a post-war phenomenon, the men who survived the war and came back to a world that did not fully know what to do with them, who had been trained to use Pokémon as weapons, who knew how to command them and fight with them and exploit their capabilities, but who had returned to a society that was now trying to pretend Pokémon were companions and partners and friends. Some of them became gym leaders, channeling their skills into something structured and acceptable. Some of them became Team Rocket, taking the skills the war gave them and applying them to a world where those skills still had economic value, even if that value was now criminal rather than patriotic. Giovanni himself reads very differently once you accept this framework. He is not a cartoon villain. He is a man who built an empire in the chaos following a catastrophe, who holds two roles simultaneously, because the post-war world has not finished deciding what is legitimate and what is not. When you defeat him at the end of the game, and he disbands Team Rocket and walks away, it feels less like the defeat of evil and more like the collapse of the last major institution built on the ruins of the war. The world is, finally, able to move on. The player character, 10 years old, the child of someone who may or may not be alive, beginning their journey in a world still quietly rearranging itself around the shape of the people who are not there, is the new generation. The first one that did not grow up with the war as an immediate reality. The first one that is allowed, for the first time, to relate to Pokémon purely as partners rather than as weapons. There is a moment in the game that becomes quietly devastating once you read it through this lens. Professor Oak, at the very beginning, stops you from stepping into the tall grass. He tells you it is dangerous. He is, on the surface, being a protective figure, keeping a child from rushing into the unknown without preparation. But the theory suggests something else is happening in that moment. Oak is a man who lived through the war, who watched Pokémon used as instruments of violence, who built his career on the idea that humans and Pokémon can have a relationship based on something other than combat and exploitation. When he stops you at the edge of the tall grass, he is not just being cautious. He is trying to do something different this time. He is trying to introduce you to this world the right way, with care, with attention, with the understanding that what is in that grass is not an enemy. He gives you a Pokémon not as a weapon, but as a companion. He calls it a research assistant. He makes it personal, individual, specific. He gives you Bulbasaur or Charmander or Squirtle, and he says, "This is yours, not a tool, yours." After the war, that distinction matters. There is one more element of the great Pokémon War theory that deserves attention before we move on, and it is the one that I think most directly supports the argument that this is not accidental world building, but intentional design. The Pokémon world is modeled, geographically and culturally, on Japan. The original Kanto region is a fairly transparent analog to the Kanto region of Japan. The timeline of the war, as the theory constructs it, places the conflict roughly in the era corresponding to the mid-20th century, the era of the actual conflicts that shaped the actual Japan that the game's designers grew up in. The absent men, the quiet towns, the ruins, the veterans who cannot quite stop being veterans, the criminal organizations built in the post-war vacuum, the new generation trying to build something different. The designers of Pokémon Red and Blue were Japanese. They grew up in a Japan that was still, in 1996, living with the consequences of its 20th century history in ways both visible and invisible. The empty spaces in the Pokémon world might not be a deliberate allegory. The creators have never confirmed that they are, but they are the work of people for whom absence is meaningful, for whom the missing generation is not an abstract concept, but something embedded in national memory and family history. Whether the war was intentional or incidental, it is there. It is in the dialogue, in the demographics, in the ruins, in the bearing of the men who survived it. It is in the 10-year-old walking out into a world that is still healing, armed with a partner who chose them, trying to do something with the world that the previous generation did not manage to do. It is in the tall grass, where everything is waiting. And speaking of children walking through worlds that are trying to heal, we are about to spend a great deal of time with a very specific child. One who has been on his journey for so long that some people believe the journey never really ends. Some people believe the journey is not real at all. Some people believe Ash Ketchum is asleep. Section 5. Ash Ketchum has never woken up. There is a version of the Pokémon story that is comfortable and familiar. A boy from a small town sets out on a journey. He collects friends and rivals and badges. He loses some battles and wins others. He grows in ways that are meaningful, even if he never seems to age. He meets his Pikachu, earns its trust, and the two of them become the most recognizable partnership in the history of animation. That story is real. It happened. It is also, according to one of the oldest and most elaborately constructed theories in the entire fandom, a dream. The Ashes in a Coma theory has been circulating in various forms since at least the early 2000s, and it is one of those arguments that keeps evolving, keeps finding new evidence in new episodes, keeps being refined by the people who find it worth their time to refine. It begins with a single question: why does Ash Ketchum never grow up? Not just in the shallow narrative sense that cartoon characters often stay the same age for convenience. The non-aging of Ash Ketchum is remarkable even by the standards of animation, because the in-universe logic of the Pokémon world clearly includes the passage of time. Seasons change. Events reference things that happened in previous episodes. Characters who were introduced early in the series are acknowledged to have grown and changed. The world visibly evolves. And yet Ash himself remains 10 years old across hundreds of episodes, across multiple regions, across story arcs that span what should be years of in-universe time. Even in Pokémon Journeys, produced decades after the original series, Ash is canonically 10. The theory does not argue that this is a lazy narrative choice. It argues that it is evidence. Here is the structure of the theory in its most commonly presented form. In the very first episode of the Pokémon anime, before Ash even arrives at Professor Oak's laboratory to receive his starter Pokémon, something happens. Ash is running across a field. He sees a Pokémon in the sky, luminous, enormous, moving through storm clouds with the casual grandeur of something that does not need to explain itself. Most viewers assume this is Ho-Oh, which is a reasonable assumption given Ho-Oh's association with rainbow light and the imagery of the scene. Some later episodes appear to confirm this. The theory does not dispute the sighting. The theory asks what comes after it. Shortly into his journey, Ash and Pikachu are attacked by a flock of Spearow. This is a well-documented early episode event. The Spearow are aggressive in numbers, and Ash, trying to protect Pikachu, is struck by lightning. He falls. He goes unconscious. He wakes up in a ball of golden light, and then the next scene begins and the adventure continues. The theory proposes that Ash does not fully wake up. What if the lightning strike was more severe than depicted? What if Ash, 10 years old, lying in a field after being electrocuted by a storm while 100 birds dive at him, did not actually regain consciousness in any meaningful way? What if everything after that moment, every badge, every league, every rival, every friend, is the product of a comatose mind constructing an elaborate dream from the fragments of what it knows and fears and wants? The evidence gathered in support of this reading is surprisingly detailed. The first piece is the one that is most often cited, and it is genuinely odd. In the first episode before leaving home, Ash watches a television program about a Pokémon trainer. The trainer in the program is described as having caught a rare Pokémon near Pallet Town. The trainer's face is never shown clearly. He is tall, older, clearly accomplished. Some versions of the theory identify this figure as an adult Ash, the Ash that should have existed, the Ash growing up in the real world, while the Ash in the dream stays frozen at 10. The second piece of evidence is the one that makes the theory emotionally resonant rather than just clever. Every person in Ash's dream world is a version of someone from his real life. His mother, who frets about him constantly and checks in regularly, is his actual mother, present in his unconscious mind because she is the person at his bedside, the person whose voice he can still faintly hear. Misty, the first person he meets after the accident, is a nurse or a doctor, someone in scrubs whose orange hair and brisk efficiency filter through the unconscious mind into something the dream logic converts into a girl with red hair and a bicycle. Brock, the steady, dependable presence who handles the practical details of the journey, is perhaps a male nurse or another medical professional, the person who is there consistently, who Ash's dreaming mind has recast as a friend rather than a caretaker. Team Rocket, in this reading, represents the anxiety, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of having things taken away, the fear of failure. These are all things that a hospitalized child might experience, and the dream converts them into an external threat that can be defeated. The reason Team Rocket never actually wins, never actually takes Pikachu, never succeeds despite turning up in every region and every situation, is that they cannot win. They are the manifestation of anxiety in a dream, and in a dream, the anxiety is never allowed to fully succeed, because that would mean waking up, and waking up might mean something worse than the dream. The third piece of evidence is the structure of the journey itself. Ash's journey is, when you look at it from a certain distance, a series of emotionally significant completions. He earns a badge. He makes a friend. He wins and loses in roughly equal measure. He learns things about loyalty and trust, and the nature of the bond between a person and the things they care about. These are not the progressions of a real journey through a dangerous world. They are the progressions of a therapeutic process, of a mind working through something. The theory becomes more specific in later iterations. Some versions argue that the Pokémon Ash encounters represent different aspects of his developing emotional landscape. His relationship with Charizard, the partner who refuses to obey, who must be won over, whose respect has to be earned through demonstrated worth, is a dream representation of Ash's relationship with some authority figure in his real life, perhaps a parent, perhaps a teacher, perhaps a doctor, someone who Ash has not yet been able to trust, whose trust he is trying to earn in the only way he knows how, by proving himself in battle. There is also the matter of what happens at the end of the Indigo League. Ash loses. He does not become champion. He comes so close, makes it to the final rounds, defeats opponents that should have been beyond him, and then loses, and then the journey simply continues. It does not end. There is no moment of waking up. The dream moves to a new region, presents new badges to earn, new friends to make, new versions of the same essential story. The theory suggests that Ash cannot become champion because becoming champion would be the resolution of the dream. The dream is not about winning. The dream is about continuing. Every time Ash gets close to the thing that would complete the narrative adds another chapter, another island, another region, another reason to keep going. Keep going means stay asleep. Stay asleep means do not have to face whatever waits outside the dream. The most poignant version of this theory includes a specific detail about Pikachu. Pikachu is not a symbolic figure in this reading. Pikachu is real, in the sense that a stuffed animal a child brings to the hospital is real, a physical object of comfort that a 10-year-old had with him when he fell. Not an actual Pokémon, because there are no actual Pokémon in the real world, but something, a toy, a drawing, a character he had seen and loved. The dream takes this thing and makes it his companion, gives it personality and warmth and the ability to protect him. Pikachu is the comfort object that became a friend, the beloved thing that the dreaming mind promoted to protagonist. This explains, if you find the theory convincing, why Ash never releases Pikachu the way he releases other Pokémon. Pikachu is not just a strong battle partner. Pikachu is the anchor, the emotional center, the thing that holds the dream together. The theory received a strange and somewhat uncomfortable piece of narrative support when, after more than 20 years of the anime, Ash Ketchum finally became world champion. He won. He reached the top. And then, almost immediately, the creators announced that Ash's story was ending and the series would follow new protagonists, the resolution of the dream. The completion of the thing the unconscious mind had been working toward for 25 years of broadcast time. And then the waking up, the handing off of the narrative to someone else, which in the context of the theory means Ash is awake now. He does not need the dream anymore. The journey can belong to someone else. Whether that reading is earned or coincidental, it is remarkable that the structure of the narrative itself, the long stasis of non-aging, the perpetual almost winning, the sudden resolution after decades, the immediate departure, maps so precisely onto the emotional logic of a coma dream. Ash Ketchum may never have been dreaming. He may simply be the protagonist of a very long television show with narrative choices that prioritize consistency over realism. That is the most obvious explanation, and it is probably the correct one. But the other explanation, the one where a boy fell in a field on a sunny morning and built an entire world out of everything he hoped and feared and loved, is the kind of story that does not need to be true to mean something. It means something anyway. It means that even when we are most lost, we build worlds, we build companions, we build a Pikachu. We keep going because stopping is the one thing we are not ready to do. Section 6. Blues Raticate and the Weight of Silence. Most of the great Pokémon theories are about addition. They take the world you know and add something to it, a layer of meaning or context or darkness that was not visible before. But the Blues Raticate theory is about subtraction. It is about something that is taken away, quietly, between one moment and the next, and about what the absence of that thing reveals. You encounter your rival, known in the original games as Blue or Gary or whatever name you give him, multiple times throughout your journey. He is arrogant, he is competitive, he defeats you in your first real battle. He has Eradicate. Specifically, when you fight Blue aboard the SS Anne, the luxury ocean liner docked in Vermilion City, his team includes Eradicate. It is not a particularly remarkable Raticate. It is the kind of Pokémon a young trainer collects in the early stages of their journey, building a team as they go. But it is there. It is on his team. You fight it. The next time you see Blue is in Lavender Town. He is standing in the Pokémon Tower, the building that serves as a graveyard for dead Pokémon. He does not explain why he is there. He challenges you to a battle, as he always does, with the same arrogance and the same dismissiveness. But if you check his team, something is different. The Raticate is gone. It is not there. His team has changed in the time since you fought him on the SS Anne, and the Raticate he had then is not there now. It has been replaced by other Pokémon. He does not mention it. The game does not acknowledge it. You fight him, you win or lose, and you move on. The theory asks, why is Blue in Lavender Town? There is no gym in Lavender Town. There is no badge to earn, no trainer challenge that would bring a competitive young Pokémon trainer to this quiet, gray, melancholy place. The Pokémon Tower is a graveyard. People go there to mourn. The only reason a trainer would be in the tower, standing quietly, not collecting anything, not progressing anywhere, is the same reason anyone goes to a graveyard. Blue lost his Raticate. The timeline fits uncomfortably well. You battled Blue on the SS Anne. The battle was intense, perhaps more intense than you realized. The Raticate took significant damage. Blue, who is proud and competitive, and not the kind of person who would show weakness or concern, may not have treated its injuries as seriously as he should have. Or he may have may have rushed to a Pokémon Center, may have done everything right, and still lost it, because Pokémon can die. The games are generally quiet about this, generally keep the concept at a safe narrative distance. But the Pokédex entries and the existence of the Pokémon Tower make clear that Pokémon mortality is real in this world. Blue's Raticate died, and Blue, who is arrogant and proud and puts on an excellent performance of not caring about anything except winning, went to Lavender Town to be near where it was buried. He does not tell you this. He would never tell you this. He challenges you to a battle the moment he sees you, because that is what he does, because that is the armor he wears. He does not say, I lost something. He does not say, I am here because I am grieving. He says what he always says, that he is better than you, that you got lucky, that it does not matter. But he is standing in a graveyard. There is a line of dialogue that Blue has in this encounter that becomes a different thing entirely once you read it through this lens. He says something, the exact wording varies across different versions and translations, about his Pokémon not being HM slaves, about how, unlike the player, he trains his Pokémon to be strong. It is meant, in the context of a normal playthrough, to be simple braggadocio, the rival taunting the hero. But if you are standing in a graveyard and you have just lost a member of your team, the thing you might most need to tell yourself, the thing you might most need to say out loud to another trainer who you can use as a mirror for your own fears, is that your Pokémon were strong, that you did not fail them, that you trained them well, that whatever happened was not your fault. The theory does not make Blue a good person. He is not suddenly sympathetic because he might be grieving. He is still the same competitive, dismissive, sometimes cruel rival he was before, but he becomes a complete person. A young person who is learning, for the first time, what it costs to build relationships with beings who can die, who is responding to that education the way proud young people often respond to grief, by standing up straighter and talking louder and going to the right place, even if they would never explain to anyone why it was the right place to go. The theory has one more layer that most people skip over, and it is the one that makes the ending of Pokémon Red and Blue hit differently. When you finally defeat Blue at the end of the game, when you beat him in the championship battle at the Pokémon League, and Professor Oak shows up and gently, pointedly tells Blue that he needs to treat his Pokémon with more care, the scene has traditionally been read as a simple moral lesson. Be nice to your Pokémon. Do not be arrogant. Character growth. But if Blue has already lost Eradicate, if he has already paid, in the most concrete possible way, the price of treating the journey as a competition rather than as a relationship, then Oak's words are not a simple lesson. They are a reminder of something Blue already knows, something he learned on the SS Anne, or in the hospital, or in the tower, standing next to a grave that he never told anyone about. Oak is not teaching Blue a lesson. Oak is telling Blue that he already knows the thing Oak is trying to say, and that it is time to stop pretending he does not. The Raticate is never mentioned again in any version of the game. It is not in any subsequent roster. It is not commemorated anywhere. It is simply gone, the way things go in a world that generally prefers not to dwell on what has been lost. But it was there, and then it was not. And Blue stood in a graveyard and did not say why. Sometimes the silence is the whole story. Section 7. Gengar, Clefable, and the Shape of a Shadow. Not all Pokémon theories are built on grief. Some of them are built on geometry. The Gengar Clefable theory is one of the cleanest, most visually arresting theories in the entire catalog. It does not require elaborate timeline reconstruction or careful reading of dialogue. It requires a piece of paper, 2 pencil outlines, and about 30 seconds of looking. Gengar is a ghost-type Pokémon. It is round and purple and grinning, and it has been one of the most beloved designs in the franchise since the very beginning. It haunts dark places. Its Pokédex entries are full of lines about cold shadows and the feeling of being watched, and the specific chill you get in an empty room at night. Gengar is, aesthetically and thematically, associated with darkness, with the absence of warmth, with the unsettling quality of things seen from the corner of your eye. Clefable is a normal-type Pokémon. It is round and pink and cheerful-looking, with tiny wings and upturned ears and a curled tail. It lives on mountaintops, close to the moon. Its Pokédex entries describe it as rare, as shy, as appearing on clear moonlit nights when the conditions are exactly right. Clefable is, aesthetically and thematically, associated with light, with gentleness, with the kind of magic that is warm rather than cold. They are, on the surface, opposites, the shadow and the light, the haunted dark and the quiet moon. Now look at their silhouettes. If you trace the outline of Clefable, the round body, the small wing shapes on the sides, the pointed ears, the curled tail, the basic proportions of a creature standing with its arms slightly away from its body, and then trace the outline of Gengar in the same position, you will find something that should not be possible. The silhouettes are nearly identical. The proportions match. The ear shapes correspond. The body width and the limb positioning and the overall stance are so similar that, in pure outline, one looks almost like the shadow of the other. This is not an accident of generic round cartoon character design. The specific matching of proportions, the exact shape of the ear, the specific curve of the body, the width of the stance, is too precise to be coincidental. The designers put these creatures in the same game, in the same original roster of 151, with outlines that mirror each other exactly. They are not just vaguely similar. One is the other, rendered in a different medium. The theory argues that Gengar is Clefable's shadow, not metaphorically, literally. In the Pokémon world, shadows are not necessarily inert. The concept of shadow Pokémon, creatures twisted by darkness into something aggressive and closed off from the world, appears explicitly in later games. The games have always treated shadows as morally and metaphysically significant in a way that goes beyond decoration. A shadow in this world is not just the absence of light. It has weight and presence and, potentially, life. The theory proposes that every Pokémon casts a shadow that has, at some level, its own existence. That the shadow of Clefable, the inverse of its warmth and gentleness and moonlit grace, detached at some point and became something autonomous, became Gengar, became the cold side of the same coin. This would explain the type immunity. Ghost-type attacks do not affect normal-type Pokémon. Normal-type attacks do not affect Ghost-type Pokémon. In the mechanics of the game, these two types are mutually immune to each other. They exist in a kind of parallel relationship, where each one simply passes through the other. The theory reads this as confirmation of the shadow relationship. Clefable and Gengar cannot harm each other, because they are the same thing expressed in two different ways. A thing cannot be damaged by its own shadow. The name evidence is also interesting. Gengar's name is derived from the German word doppelganger, a term that specifically means a shadow double, a dark mirror of a living person. Not a ghost in the conventional sense. A doppelganger is not someone who has died and returned. A doppelganger is a copy, a shadow, a version of someone that exists alongside them in a way that is deeply unsettling because it is both familiar and wrong. The German root is embedded directly in Gengar's name. Clefable's Japanese name is Pixie. Gengar's Japanese name is Gengar. The word Gengar in German means, loosely, counter-goer, or one who goes against, as in a double going in the opposite direction. The naming convention is not subtle. In February 2026, the official Pokémon social media accounts posted a Valentine's Day graphic pairing Gengar and Clefable as a romantic couple. This was presented as sweet and playful, and the fandom received it enthusiastically, but it also functioned, for the people who had held this theory for decades, as something approaching confirmation. The official branding of the franchise acknowledged in an official product that these two Pokémon are paired, that they belong together, that there is a relationship between them that goes beyond coincidence of design. The theory extends, in its most elaborate form, to other pairs in the Pokémon world. Marowak and Cubone have already been discussed, but others are worth noting. Vileplume and Bellossom, one shaped toward darkness, one toward light. Haunter and arguably certain fairy types. The idea that every creature of pure darkness has a counterpart of light, and that the two are not enemies but reflections, is one that recurs throughout the franchise in ways that may or may not be intentional. But Gengar and Clefable are the most elegant case, the cleanest geometry, the most precise silhouettes. Look at them together sometime, trace the outlines, think about how they are both round, both mischievous in their respective ways, both associated with the night, one with the cold of it, one with the warmth. One lives on the mountain, close to the stars. The other haunts the shadow the mountain casts. They are not enemies, they are halves. And the funniest thing about being a shadow is that you can never quite catch the light that makes you. Section 8. Parasect and what happens when you are not there anymore. There are theories that are elegant. There are theories that are emotionally resonant. And then there are theories that are quietly horrifying. The kind that settle into you slowly, that you think about at 3 in the morning, not because they are dramatic, but because they are still, because the horror in them is not loud. The parasect theory is the third kind. Paras is a small Pokémon, a crab-like creature with 2 mushrooms growing from its back. It is introduced in the first generation, found in rock caves and damp places, unremarkable in the way that early route bug-type Pokémon often are. The mushrooms on its back are called Tochukaso, a real-world parasitic fungus that grows on insects and eventually takes control of their behavior. The Pokédex tells you this openly. It mentions the mushrooms. It mentions that the mushrooms drain Paras of its nutrients. It mentions the relationship between the host and the thing growing on it. But it does so matter-of-factly, without emphasis. The way Pokédex entries often deliver terrible information in the blandest possible voice. Paras evolves into Parasect, and when it does, something is different. Look at Paras. It has pupils. Small, clearly delineated pupils, the dark circular marks that indicate the direction the creature is looking, that indicate, in the visual language of cartoon design, that something is looking back at you. Paras has eyes in the normal sense. It sees you. It is present. Parasect does not have pupils. Parasect's eyes are blank white, flat, pale, without the dark center that would indicate an active visual experience. They are the eyes of a creature that is no longer, in any meaningful sense, looking at anything. They are not dead eyes, they are emptied eyes, eyes that once had something in them and no longer do. The mushroom on Parasect's back, now a single, enormous Tochukaso, grown far beyond the relatively modest size of Paras's 2 mushrooms, covers most of its body. The mushroom is the dominant visual element of Parasect. The crab underneath is the minor element. The host has become the vehicle. The theory argues, based on real science, that this is exactly what has happened. The fungus Ophiocordyceps unilateralis is one of the most documented examples of parasitic mind control in nature. It infects ants. It manipulates their nervous system. It forces them to climb to a specific height on a specific kind of plant, to bite down and lock their jaws, and then to wait while the fungus grows through their body and eventually kills them, releasing spores to infect new hosts. The ant's behavior in the final stages of infection is not its own behavior. It is the fungus's behavior, executed through the ant's nervous system. The ant is still alive, in the technical sense, but the ant is not there anymore. Paras has Tochukaso mushrooms growing on its back. This is directly stated. The mushrooms take nutrients. This is directly stated. When Paras evolves into Parasect, the mushroom has grown to dominate the host. The eyes have gone blank, and the Pokédex entry for Parasect specifies that the bug is mostly controlled by the mushroom. Mostly controlled, not fully. Mostly. That one word is the most unsettling word in the entry. Mostly. There is, somewhere inside Parasect, something that is still Paras. Something that retains enough biological identity to technically remain the host. Something that can still, in some minimal and probably agonized way, experience whatever it is experiencing. The mushroom does most of the thinking. The Pokédex tells you this directly. In one entry, it specifies that the mushroom does all the thinking. The creature you are looking at, the creature you are commanding in battle, the Parasect that has blank eyes and a posture determined by the weight of the organism on its back. This creature is not making decisions. It is a vehicle. It walks where the mushroom needs it to walk. It fights when the mushroom needs it to fight. It releases spores when the conditions are right for propagation. The original Pokémon is gone. It did not die in the conventional sense. Its body is still operating. But Paras, the creature that had pupils and presence and the small, specific quality of being someone who was looking back at you, that creature is no longer there. This theory is not speculation. It is almost entirely built on direct Pokédex information, corroborated by real-world biology. The creators of Pokémon did not try to hide this. They put it in the entries. They drew Paras with pupils and Parasect without them. They named the mushroom after a real parasitic fungus. They made Parasect's dominant move set revolve around releasing spores. Spore, sleep powder, stun spore. the propagation mechanics of a fungal organism using a mobile host to distribute itself as widely as possible. They told you exactly what was happening. They told you in every way they could think to tell you. And the game asks you, without comment, to train a Paraz, to invest in its growth, to be there for the early route grinding and the small victories, to watch it level up, and then to watch it evolve, to watch the pupils disappear, to have in your party, after that moment, a creature you helped raise that is no longer home. The theory extends, in some versions, to the question of what happens when you command Parasect. When you select a move in battle, whose decision are you making? You are the trainer, the external agent directing the Pokemon's behavior, but the mushroom is also directing the Pokemon's behavior. You and the fungus are, in a sense, issuing competing instructions to a host that no longer has a will of its own to adjudicate between them. Does the mushroom cooperate with trainers? Does it find that cooperation useful? That being part of a trainer's team provides the mobility and the exposure to other Pokemon that maximizes its spore distribution opportunities? Is the relationship between Parasect and its trainer not a partnership, but a coincidence of interests between the trainer and the mushroom, conducted through the body of something that is no longer a participant in the conversation? The blank eyes of Parasect have been interpreted in many ways over the years. Some players see them as a design quirk, a visual shorthand for the evolution into a more powerful and serious-looking Pokémon. Some see them as intentionally unsettling. Some see them as a mercy, as the visual representation of a consciousness that has been mercifully, if not voluntarily, removed from a situation it could not have survived as an active participant. Some see them as empty. I do not have a redemptive reading of Parasect to offer you. Some of the theories we discussed tonight have a quality of beauty to them, or at least of elegance. Parasect does not. Parasect is just what it is, a creature that was something and was replaced by something else, and does not know the difference because there is no longer a there to know. The mushroom does all the thinking, and the mushroom does not grieve. Section 9, N is a Zoroark. Some theories are quietly sad, some are philosophical, and some arrive with the energy of a puzzle that snaps together so cleanly in so many places at once that you cannot look at the original material the same way afterward. The theory that N, one of the most beloved characters in the entire franchise, is actually a Zoroark in disguise is that third kind. Let us begin with who N is, for anyone who came to the franchise through the earlier generations and never spent time in Unova. Pokémon Black and White, released in 2010, are widely regarded as among the most narratively ambitious games in the series. They were designed intentionally as a response to the criticism that the franchise had become formulaic. Same structure, different setting, collect 8 badges, fight the Elite Four, catch them all. Black and White took that structure and used it to ask a question that had never been seriously asked before. Is it ethical? In a world where Pokémon are conscious beings capable of feeling pain and joy and loss, to capture them and force them to fight? The person asking that question is N. N is a young man, visually unusual, designed with a tall, lanky frame and long green hair and eyes that shift color depending on how you look at him. He appears repeatedly throughout the game, always at significant moments, always with things to say about the relationship between humans and Pokémon. He argues that Pokémon should be free, that trainers are oppressors, that the bond between human and Pokémon is not genuine but imposed. He is complicated and sincere and impossible to dismiss as simply a villain, because most of what he says is at least partially right, and the game knows it and does not try to argue otherwise. His real name, revealed in the late game, is Natural Harmonia Gropius. He is the adopted son of Getsis, the actual villain, the man who used N's genuine convictions as a weapon, who cultivated N's beliefs in order to use them for his own purposes, who manipulated a young person of extraordinary empathy and unusual history into doing something monstrous without understanding the full picture. N grew up in a room in a castle, isolated from other humans, surrounded only by Pokémon. He can hear their voices, understand their feelings directly. He thinks in ways that are fundamentally different from other humans. He is, in all the ways that matter to the story, closer to a Pokémon than to a person. And here is where the theory begins. Zoroark is a Pokémon introduced in Generation 5, in Black and White, as one of the signature new species of the Unova region. It is a dark type, a fox-like creature with a theatrical, elegant design. Its entire identity is built around a single ability: illusion. Zoroark can perfectly impersonate other Pokémon. It creates illusions so convincing that they cannot be distinguished from reality. It uses this ability to protect its young, to confuse enemies, to pass undetected through a world that would otherwise find it threatening. Zoroark's role in the Generation 5 mythology is significant. There is an entire paired set of event-distributed Pokémon, Zorua and Zoroark, with backstories about a mother trying to protect her child by taking a different form. The emotional core of Zoroark's character is the same as the emotional core of N's character: the need to conceal a true nature in order to survive in a world that would not accept it. Now, the evidence. The first piece is spatial. In Pokémon Black and White, there is a scene in N's castle where N and Zoroark are both present. When N leaves the room, Zoroark disappears simultaneously. When N appears in a new location, Zoroark has been absent from the previous one for exactly the same duration. Throughout the entire game, there is no moment where N and Zoroark are verifiably, visually present in the same place at the same time. Every time you think about where they both were, you find that they were never quite coexisting. The second piece is behavioral. Zoroark's ability is illusion, the capacity to become something else so convincingly that observers cannot detect the deception. If N is a Zoroark using illusion to appear human, then everything about his appearance, the unusual hair, the shifting eyes, the quality of his presence that every character in the game describes as different from that of normal people, is a constructed image. A Zoroark's illusion is not a perfect copy. It is a creative interpretation, a version of the thing it is trying to resemble. N looks almost human. He looks like a very convincing impression of a human made by something that learned what humans look like from observation, but does not share their inner experience. The third piece is the toys in his room. N grew up in that castle room. The room is accessible in the game after you clear the main storyline, and if you explore it carefully, you will find childhood artifacts scattered around the floor. Toys. The toys that N played with as a child. They have claw marks on them, not human hand marks. Claw marks. A child who played with toys with human hands would not leave claw marks. A young Zoroark, maintaining an illusion of human form, but occasionally dropping the pretense in private, in the safety of its own room. A young Pokémon who was alone with its toys and let the form slip. Because holding the illusion is exhausting, and sometimes you just want to be what you are, would leave exactly those marks. The fourth piece is language. Getsis, at the end of the game, when his manipulation is fully exposed and he drops the pretense of being a caring father, says something about N that is remarkable for its specificity. He tells N that he has the heart of a Pokémon, not the heart of a naive person, not the heart of someone who has been deceived, the heart of a Pokémon. He is contemptuous about this. He says it as a condemnation. He built his entire plan around N's unusual empathy, and he frames that empathy not as a human quality, but as an animal one, as the quality of something that is not rational in the way that Getsis considers himself rational. If N is a Pokémon, Getsis knows. He raised N. He shaped N. He used N's Pokémon nature as a tool, telling N that he could hear Pokémon voices because he was special, because he was chosen, because he had a gift. He never told N what the gift actually was. He never told N what he was. The fifth piece is the flashback mechanic. In the game, when you encounter certain Pokémon through specific triggers, you receive flashback sequences, brief memories of those Pokémon's pasts. One of these flashbacks, triggered under specific conditions, contains imagery associated with N's childhood. Specifically, the flashback is triggered through Zoroark, not through N directly. The memory belongs to Zoroark. The childhood being remembered is the childhood of a Zoroark who grew up in a castle, surrounded by Pokémon, taking the shape of a boy. The sixth piece is the name, N, a single letter. In the Pokémon world, names mean things. Gym leaders have names that reflect their types. Important characters have names drawn from thematic concepts. The language of naming is deliberately constructed. N is one letter. When you rotate N 90 degrees, you get Z. The first letter of Zoroark. N is Z. N is Zoroark. The theory, assembled in its complete form, tells a story that is different from the official story of Black and White, but that does not contradict a single piece of documented evidence. A Zoroark child, taken by Getsis, raised to believe it was human, used as a puppet for a man who understood exactly what it was and found that understanding useful. Taught to fight for the freedom of Pokémon by the one person in its life who had never once considered it free. Given a cause and a purpose and a philosophy, and then aimed, like a weapon, at the very system it was suffering under without knowing. N, at the end of the game, when Getsis reveals himself, is not just a deceived idealist realizing his father was evil. He is, if the theory is correct, a creature realizing that his entire understanding of himself was constructed by someone who had every incentive to keep him from the truth. He has been fighting for Pokémon liberation, while being himself a Pokémon who was never free. There is a scene at the very end of the game, after everything has resolved, where N releases his Reshiram or Zekrom, whichever legendary dragon he had bonded with, back into the wild. He says goodbye. He says that he needs to find his own answer. He leaves on a white horse that appears from nowhere and is never explained. A Zoroark can create illusions of any Pokémon, including white horses. N rides away into an ending that the game does not provide. He has no destination specified. He is, for the first time in the game, going somewhere of his own choosing, towards something he cannot yet name, as whatever he actually is. The theory does not tell us what he finds, neither does the game, but if he is a Zoroark, then his journey toward the truth is also a journey toward himself, toward the moment when he can stop holding the human form, when the illusion can finally be allowed to rest, when he can simply be the creature he has always been in his own private room, in the dark, when no one was watching. Section 10. Arceus, the Unknown, and the Architecture of Everything. There is a question that the Pokémon world has been circling since Generation 1, one that becomes more explicit with each new set of games, and that was finally addressed most directly in Pokémon Diamond and Pearl. Who made this world? The answer, according to the official mythology that emerged from the Sinnoh Psalms and the Sinjoh Ruins event, is Arceus, the Alpha Pokémon, the one before all others. The Pokémon that, according to the Pokédex, hatched from an egg in a void of nothingness and then used its 1,000 arms to shape the universe. Arceus created time in the form of Dialga. It created space in the form of Palkia. It created the boundary between dimensions in the form of Giratina. And then it went to sleep, as gods often do after major creative efforts. This is the official mythology. The Sinnoh myths are recorded in stone tablets found throughout the games, and the cosmology they describe is genuinely remarkable for a franchise nominally targeted at children. A creation story that deals with the generation of time and space from a singular creative act, with a god who stepped back from its creation and left it to run on its own. But the theory we are going to examine here is not about Arceus in isolation. It is about the relationship between Arceus and the Unknown. Those flat, alphabetic, seemingly unremarkable Pokémon introduced in Gold and Silver, found in the ruins of ancient structures, individually weak to the point of being arguably the least useful Pokémon in competitive play. Why would a game about gods and the creation of the universe bother to connect them to Pokémon that look like the alphabet? The Pokédex entries for the Unknown are, if you read them carefully and in sequence, progressively more unsettling. Early entries describe them as mysterious ancient Pokémon that resemble old writing. Later entries begin to hedge. They describe a relationship between unknown and thoughts, between unknown and psychic energy, between unknown and the ability to reshape reality based on belief. One entry notes that no one knows which came first, the written language that the unknown resemble, or the unknown themselves. Another notes that when many unknown are gathered together, their power grows beyond prediction. There are 28 unknown, 26 representing the letters of the Latin alphabet, plus 2 punctuation marks, the exclamation point and the question mark. They are the building blocks of written language. They are, individually, inert. But the Pokédex keeps hinting that collectively, in sufficient numbers, they can do something that goes far beyond what any individual one can do. The theory argues that Arceus did not create the world alone. The specific language in the Diamond and Pearl mythology is worth examining. Arceus is described as having 1,000 arms when it shaped the universe. 1,000 arms. Arceus, in its physical form, does not have 1,000 arms. It is a quadrupedal Pokémon that resembles a horse or a deer with a specific golden wheel around its midsection. It does not visibly have anything approaching 1,000 arms, unless the 1,000 arms are not literal limbs, unless they are tools, unless they are the unknown. 28 individual unknown, each one representing one element of written language, a letter, a punctuation mark, a unit of meaning. In the Sinnoh myths, the world was created through Arceus's act, but the act of creation in every major creation mythology in the real world involves language. In Genesis, God speaks the world into existence. In many Hindu traditions, the universe is vibrated into being through sound. In Kabbalistic tradition, the world is built from the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, each letter having weight and meaning and creative power. The connection between language and creation is so fundamental and so universal that it appears in almost every human cosmology ever recorded. The unknown are the Pokémon world's language. They are its alphabet. They are the shapes through which meaning is made and reality is written. If Arceus used the unknown as tools of creation, if the 1,000 arms of the creation myth are the unknown themselves, each one carrying a unit of meaning that, combined with the others, could write anything into existence, then the world is, literally, made of language, made of letters, made of the same shapes that are now found carved into ruins, weak and individually useless, scattered across the world with no clear purpose. The theory draws on the Sinnoh Ruins event as its most concrete piece of evidence. The Sinnoh Ruins are an area accessible through a specific in-game event when you have both a Sinnoh game and a Johto game. When you arrive there with Arceus in your party, something extraordinary happens. The Ruins, a location that shares architectural features with both the Sinnoh Ruins where Dialga and Palkia have their legendary shrines and the Johto Ruins where Unknown are found, become active. The Unknown fill the air. The walls shimmer. Arceus appears before you and offers to create one of 3 Pokémon, Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina. Create, not give you a captured one. Create one in real time in your presence. And when it does, the room is full of unknown. They are not decorative. They are not atmospheric background. In the lore of the event, the creation of a legendary Pokémon, a godlike being with power over time or space or dimensions, is performed by Arceus in a room full of unknown, in a location that fuses the visual language of 2 separate ancient sites. The unknown are present at the creation. They are involved. The sound files of the games contain another piece of evidence that is well documented among data miners and researchers. In Diamond and Pearl, there is an audio file associated with the unknown, a sound that plays when large groups of them are present in certain locations. The frequency of this sound, when analyzed, is remarkably close to the frequency of the melody played by the Azure Flute, the item that, when played at the Spear Pillar, summons Arceus itself. Not exactly the same frequency, but close enough that the relationship between the 2 sounds is clearly intentional. The unknowns sing in a register that harmonizes with the song that wakes God. There is something in this theory that goes beyond clever pattern matching and becomes genuinely moving, in the way that the best mythological thinking is always moving. The idea that the world was created through language, through the arrangement of small, individual units of meaning into patterns too large for any one of them to express alone, is not just a Pokémon theory. It is a theory about how everything works. Every story is built of individual words. Every word is built of individual letters. Every letter, alone, is just a shape with a sound attached. But combined in sufficient number, in the right order, they can create anything. They can create worlds. The unknown are weak because letters are weak. An A by itself cannot tell you anything. A single letter is just a mark. But gather enough of them in the right configuration, and you can write the sky. You can write time. You can write a God who sleeps in the center of everything, dreaming of what else might be possible. And somewhere in those ruins, in the dark, in ancient carved chambers that predate the oldest human settlements in the game world, the letters wait, individually inert, collectively capable of things that should not be possible, waiting perhaps for the moment when someone gathers enough of them together and writes something new into the world. Section 11. The Pokémon Multiverse. Here is one theory on this list that does not need to be called speculation because the creators confirmed it, not hinted at it, not implied it, stated it directly, in-game, through a character who exists specifically to provide this information. The Pokémon multiverse is real. It is canon. It is documented. But the implications of it, the full weight of what it means that the Pokémon world contains not one timeline, but many, that every choice branches, that there are versions of this world where the catastrophes were worse, or the heroes arrived differently, or the legendary Pokémon made different choices. Those implications have been explored in fan theory long before the games caught up to them, and they go considerably further than the official lore has chosen to follow. In Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, released in 2014, there is a character named Zinnia. She is a lorekeeper, someone whose specific purpose is to maintain the ancient oral tradition of her people, the Draconid, who have been watching the skies and recording what they see for generations. She is, in terms of narrative function, the person the game uses to explain what is actually happening in the Delta episode, the climactic post-game storyline in which a meteor is threatening the world. Zinnia is sharp and morally complicated, and one of the best-written characters in the franchise. She disagrees with the player's solution to the meteor problem. She objects to it not because she has not thought about it, but because she has thought about it more than anyone else in the room, and she understands something they do not. That the solution being proposed, the use of Mega Evolution energy to redirect the meteor, will work in this world, but it will send the meteor somewhere. It will not destroy it. It will displace it. It will redirect it to a version of this world where no one knows it is coming, where there is no Mega Evolution energy to redirect it again, where it will simply hit and end everything in a world that is just as real as this one. Zinnia calls this unacceptable. She calls it murder. She calls it the kind of moral blindness that comes from caring about your own world without acknowledging that the other ones are equally real. And then she explains the multiverse. She explains, clearly and at length, that the Pokémon world does not exist as a single timeline, but as an infinite series of branching possibilities. That every major decision, every moment where the history of the world could have gone differently, produced a divergence. That there are worlds where Mega Evolution was never discovered, and worlds where it was discovered differently, and worlds where the meteor arrived and ended everything, and worlds where it did not. And all of these worlds are equally present, equally inhabited, equally real. This is the multiverse. It is confirmed. It is canon. The fan theories that exist around this confirmation are mostly concerned with mapping which games belong to which timelines and what the relationships between them look like. The accepted fan-constructed timeline, which has been partially confirmed by official sources, including a timeline chart released with the official Pokémon Hyrule Historia equivalent, the Pokémon X and Y art book, goes roughly like this. There is an original timeline, a single world in which all the early events of the franchise occur. Arceus creates the universe. The legendary events of Sinnoh take place. At some point in this original world, a hero with a specific legendary Pokémon battles and defeats a great threat. That battle is the branching point. If the hero wins, if they successfully complete the challenge, the timeline continues in one direction. The games that follow from that victory are the games we associate with the primary timeline, the events of Gold and Silver, of the Johto games, of the world where things went more or less as well as they could have. If the hero is defeated, if the challenge fails, the timeline branches into catastrophe. The world continues, but scarred by the failure. The games that follow from that defeat are set in a darker, more damaged version of history. Some researchers of the theory associate certain game events with this darker branch, though the official materials are less specific about this than about other aspects of the multiverse. And then the events of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which take place in a world where Mega Evolution was discovered, a feature that does not exist in the Gold and Silver timeline or the original Red and Blue timeline, which establishes Hoenn as existing in a separate branch from the older games, a timeline that diverged at some prior point. The full map of this multiverse is complex enough that entire academic-style essays have been written trying to chart it, and reasonable people disagree about where specific games fall. But the key point, the one that Zinnia makes explicit and that the fandom has been building toward for years, is that the world is not singular. This matters for fan theories in a specific way, because it means that every theory we have discussed tonight, every reading of the world that contradicts the canonical outcome, could be true in some branch of the multiverse. The version of the world where Kubone's evolution into Kangaskhan was never removed. The version where the Great Pokémon War ended differently. The version where Ash woke up. The version where N discovered his true nature before Ghetsis could use it against him. All of these are possible worlds. The multiverse confirmation does not validate specific theories, but it does establish that the architecture of the franchise supports an infinite number of stories happening simultaneously, an infinite number of outcomes coexisting, an infinite number of versions of every character making different choices in different circumstances. The Pokémon world is not a single story. It never was. It is a multiverse of stories, and every player who has ever sat down with a cartridge or a disc or a download has been, in the logic of the franchise itself, entering a specific branch of an infinite possibility space. Your playthrough is real. Your choices matter within it. Your Pokémon are alive in the branch where you found them. And somewhere, in the infinite branching structure of the world, every question that a fan theory ever asked has an answer. Not the official answer, not the canonical answer, but an answer in a world where things went a little differently, where the gaps were filled in, where the silences were spoken into. The multiverse is not a narrative convenience. It is an invitation. Section 12. Lavender Town Syndrome and the Life of a Legend. We have spent a great deal of time tonight talking about theories that are built on logic, on evidence, on pattern recognition and textual analysis, and the careful reading of details hidden in game code. We have been doing the work of the careful theorist, gathering evidence, constructing arguments, testing conclusions against available information. But there is one more category of Pokémon theory that we have not yet discussed. One that is not, strictly speaking, a theory about the game world at all. One that exists in the space between the fictional world and the real one, in the way that the most powerful urban legends always exist in that space. Not quite here, not quite there, belonging to both and neither. We are going to talk about Lavender Town Syndrome, and we are going to be clear about what it is. It is a creepypasta. It is a piece of fan-created horror fiction. It is not real. No children died. No mysterious sonic frequencies were secretly embedded in Game Boy cartridges. The theory that the original Lavender Town music in the Japanese release of Pokémon Red and Green caused health problems in children who heard it is not supported by any documented evidence, and the people who have investigated it have found no record of any such events occurring. But Lavender Town Syndrome is one of the most enduring and psychologically sophisticated pieces of fan mythology in the history of the internet, and dismissing it as simply false misses what is actually interesting about it. Lavender Town is a real place in the game. It is small and quiet and gritty, and its music is unlike any other piece of music in the original Pokémon games. The rest of the soundtrack is upbeat and energetic, designed to keep you moving, to give your journey a sense of momentum and possibility. Lavender Town's music is slow. It is repetitive. It uses unusual intervals and a tonal quality that creates, in most listeners, a sense of unease that they struggle to articulate. It is not scary in the way that a horror film is scary. It is unsettling in the way that certain empty rooms are unsettling. Not because anything is wrong exactly, but because the quality of the silence is off, and your nervous system registers the difference before your conscious mind does. The creepypasta built around this music is extraordinarily well constructed. It begins with a plausible premise, that the original Japanese version of the music, which does exist, and is somewhat different from the international version, was even more sonically unusual than what Western players heard. It layers in pseudoscientific language about binaural beats and frequencies that affect children differently than adults, about ears that have not yet finished developing, being more sensitive to certain tonal ranges. It uses real information about the localization process, the fact that the international games did change sounds, did alter Pokémon cries, did make adjustments for different markets, to create a framework in which the larger claim seems possible. And then it tells a story. The story is that the original music, in the original Japanese release, was different enough from what eventually reached international audiences that it caused documented health problems, headaches, anxiety, behavioral changes, and in the most extreme versions of the legend, suicides, in the children who heard it, and that the people responsible for localizing the game knew this, and changed the music, and never said why. This story is not true, but the reason it is compelling, the reason it spread so quickly, The reason it has been retold and elaborated and rewritten in so many forms over so many years is worth examining, because the reason is something real. Lavender Town is genuinely unsettling. The music does produce a mild but real sense of discomfort in many listeners, and this is not an illusion or a placebo effect generated by knowing the theory. Studies of music-induced emotional response have confirmed that certain melodic intervals and rhythmic patterns reliably produce discomfort across cultural contexts. Lavender Town's music uses several of these patterns. The people who composed it either knew what they were doing or stumbled onto something that works. And Lavender Town's purpose in the game is, itself, genuinely heavy. You are a child, and you have come to a town built around a graveyard for creatures you may have lost, in a game that has been treating the concept of bond and companionship with real emotional seriousness. The music matches the setting. It is supposed to be uncomfortable. You are supposed to feel like you should not linger there. The Lavender Town Syndrome legend takes this genuine discomfort and extrapolates it into something narrative, something that has a cause and a history and a cover-up. It transforms the abstract feeling of wrongness into a story with victims and perpetrators and a secret that someone is hiding. This is exactly what legends do. Legends do not emerge from nothing. They emerge from a real feeling that needs a story around it. The feeling is true. The story is the attempt to explain the feeling, to give it shape and agency and narrative logic, because the feeling on its own is hard to live with. Every Pokémon theory we have discussed tonight is, in some sense, doing the same thing. The feeling that something happened to the missing generation, to the fathers who are not in those towns, is a real feeling. It is not a logical deduction at first. It is a sense of absence, of something missing, that precedes any analysis of dialogue or demographics. The Great Pokémon War Theory is the story that grew up around that feeling, the explanation that gave the absence a shape. The feeling that Kubone's grief is too specific and too detailed to be coincidental, that someone put something real there, something that comes from genuine understanding of what loss looks like, precedes any analysis of skull shapes or Pokédex entries. The Kubone Kangaskhan theory is the story built to honor that feeling, the feeling that Lavender Town's music is wrong, that something in it resonates at a frequency that is close to, but not quite fear, that is real. The Syndrome legend is the narrative scaffolding erected around a true emotional experience. Fan theories are not, at their core, about being correct. The best ones are correct, or at least compelling and well-evidenced. But correctness is not what makes them matter. What makes them matter is that they are the serious engagement of a large number of people with a world they were given when they were children and have never fully let go of. The Pokémon world was given to multiple generations of people at an age when they were just beginning to understand that the world was complex, that loss was real, that adults were not always honest about what had happened or why things were the way they were. It handed them a world that was bright and colorful on the surface and quietly, persistently full of shadows underneath. And millions of people, over 30 years, have been trying to understand those shadows, to read them, to name them, to build stories that explain what is there and why it is there, and what it means that it was put in front of children without explanation. That is not a trivial activity. That is the activity of people who took something seriously and refused to let it be simple. The Pokémon world rewards that refusal. It always has. Every detail we discussed tonight, the statistic that connects Ditto to Mew, the missing Raticate, the blank eyes of Parasect, the claw marks on N's toys, the simultaneous disappearance of N and Zoroark, the room full of unknown in the moment of creation, every one of these details was put there by someone, by a person or a team of people who spent time thinking about what would make the world feel real, what would make it feel layered. What would make it feel when you return to it as an adult with the memory of having loved it as a child, like it had always known more than it was telling you? The world of Pokémon knows more than it is telling you. It has always known more than it is telling you. And the people who spend their evenings, like this one, trying to hear what it is not saying out loud, are doing the most honest thing that can be done with a world you love. They are taking it seriously. They are saying, with each theory, with each carefully assembled piece of evidence, with each connection drawn between a blank eye and a real fungus, or a missing Raticate and a boy standing in a graveyard, this matters. This deserves attention. This world was made with care, and it deserves to be received with care. That is the whole of it, really. Not the specific claims, not the logical scaffolding, not the satisfaction of a theory that snaps together perfectly. The whole of it is the simple act of looking closely at something you love and finding that it looks back. Pokémon has been looking back at us for 30 years, waiting, placing details in ruins and Pokédex entries and the positions of NPCs in graveyards and the eyes of evolved creatures and the notes of music that plays in empty tower rooms, waiting for us to ask the right questions. We have been asking them. And somewhere, in the space between what the games show us and what they allow us to imagine, the answers have been there all along. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If you made it this far, through all 12 theories, through every dark corner and quiet revelation and philosophical tangent, I genuinely hope it was worth the journey. There is something rare about sitting with an idea long enough to really understand it, to feel it from the inside, and if any part of tonight's exploration gave you that feeling, then we did what we came here to do. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. It costs you nothing, and it means a great deal. It is the thing that allows more evenings like this one, more long, slow dives into worlds that deserve more than a quick glance. Like and share if you think someone else might find themselves here at 2 in the morning, wondering about a small pink creature in a ruined laboratory, and what it might have been before things went wrong. There is more to come. There always is. Until then, take care of your Pokémon. Expansion A. Ditto/Mew. The deeper biology, there are threads in the Ditto-Mew theory that deserve more time than most presentations give them. Threads that connect to real biology in ways that make the fictional argument considerably more coherent. The concept of cellular totipotency is a real biological idea. In developmental biology, a totipotent cell is a cell that retains the ability to differentiate into any cell type, any tissue, any organ, any biological structure. In a human embryo in its earliest hours, every cell is totipotent. They have not yet committed to becoming a liver cell, or a heart cell, or a neuron. They are pure potential. As development continues, cells progressively specialize, losing totipotency as they gain specific function. The price of being good at one thing is losing the capacity to be good at everything. The theory about Ditto, in light of this real biology, becomes something more precise than it might initially appear. The description of Ditto in the Pokédex, an amorphous being that can reconstitute its cellular structure to match any life form, is a description of radical, permanent totipotency. Ditto never differentiated. Its cells never committed to a specific function or form. It retained the original open-endedness of Mew's genetic material without ever progressing to the stage where that material becomes organized and directed into a specific body. This would explain the fundamental difference between what Ditto can do and what Mew can do. Mew can also transform, but Mew transforms from a position of established identity. It is Mew, and it chooses to become something else temporarily, and then it returns. Ditto does not return to something. It begins in formlessness and moves toward form, and when the external model is removed, it returns to formlessness. It does not have a self to return to. It has a default, which is the most minimal expression of its existence. The small pink blob, the 2 dots, the curve. The simplest shape its totipotent cells default to when no other model is present. Mewtwo in this reading is the opposite of Ditto. Mewtwo is Mew's genetic material forced into over-differentiation, pushed too hard, too fast, into too specific and too intense a form. Where Ditto is underdeveloped, Mewtwo is overdeveloped. Where Ditto has no stable self, Mewtwo has a self so rigid and so defined by its circumstances of creation that it cannot conceive of itself outside the context of its own pain. Ditto and Mewtwo are the 2 failure modes of the same experiment. One never became. One became too much of the wrong thing. Mew exists in the middle. Mew is what the experiment was trying to make. A being with the genetic potential for anything, and the stable, curious, playful identity of something that simply exists without needing to justify or explain itself. The 3 of them together, Mew, Mewtwo, and Ditto, form a kind of triangle around the question of identity. What does it mean to be someone? You need enough differentiation to be distinct. You need enough openness to grow and change. Too little of one, and you are formless. Too much of the other, and you are rigid. The sweet spot, the place where you are specific enough to be yourself, and flexible enough to continue being yourself over time, is extraordinarily difficult to achieve, either in real biology or in a Pokémon laboratory on a tropical island. Mew achieved it. Mewtwo and Ditto, each in their own way, demonstrate what happens when the process goes wrong in different directions. There is also the geographical dimension of the original theory that has not been fully explored. The scientists who worked on the Mewtwo project, according to the journals found in the Pokémon Mansion, were working with Mew genetic material for an extended period before the creation of Mewtwo was attempted. The earlier experiments, the ones that did not result in Mewtwo, produced results that were described as failures and were disposed of. Where does an experimental failure go when the laboratory is built on a small island with limited disposal options? It goes into the environment, into the water table, into the crevices of the natural rock formations, into Cerulean Cave, which is the nearest geological complex to Cinnabar Island through the underwater channels that the games establish as part of Kanto's geography. Ditto in Cerulean Cave is not an anomaly. It is the long-term consequence of failed experiments migrating through the natural environment over years and decades, finding stable niches in the places that Cinnabar Island's experimental runoff eventually reaches. The Ditto you find in the cave are not placed there by anyone. They arrived under their own power, or by the slow movement of water and geology, drawn perhaps by the presence of Mewtwo itself, the successful version of the thing they almost were, living in the deepest level of the cave, radiating the energy of a completed experiment that they can sense but cannot replicate. The distance between Ditto and Mewtwo is the distance between the cave's entrance and its deepest chamber, one at every level, the other at the bottom. Each one a version of an experiment that wanted to produce Mew and produce something else entirely. Expansion B, the Great War, specific evidence and broader implications. The Great Pokémon War theory becomes considerably more nuanced when you examine every available piece of evidence in sequence rather than treating the most famous pieces as sufficient. Lieutenant Surge is always cited first, and rightly so, but there are other characters whose dialogue and situation contribute to the portrait. The gym leaders themselves are worth examining as a collective. 8 gym leaders. Of those 8, every single one has a relationship with their Pokémon type that goes beyond mere preference. They demonstrate mastery, systematic knowledge, the kind of depth that comes from years of intensive, high-stakes use. Brock of Pewter City knows rock and ground types with the specificity of someone who has used them to hold ground against sustained assault. Misty's water-type expertise includes forms of battlefield utility, water as barrier, water as shock absorber, water as impediment to movement, that go beyond the recreational enthusiasm of someone who simply loves the ocean. Surge's electric expertise has already been addressed. Erica of Celadon is interesting. She is surrounded by a peaceful, almost meditative environment, and she represents the post-war generation of gym leaders, younger, trained in peacetime, her gym functioning as something closer to an academy than a facility. The older gym leaders, Koga, Blaine, Giovanni, have a quality that the younger ones do not. A stillness, a precision, a relationship with their Pokémon that looks less like affection and more like the deep mutual calibration that comes from surviving things together. Koga, the Fuchsia City gym leader and later Elite Four member, specializes in poison types and uses a battle style built around attrition, around the slow degradation of an opponent's resources over time. This is a specifically military style of Pokémon combat. You do not use poison and paralysis and confusion as an aggressive trainer trying to win quickly. You use them to survive, to outlast, to ensure that even if you cannot overpower your opponent, you can ensure they are too damaged to threaten you. It is a defensive combat philosophy from someone who has spent time thinking about worst-case scenarios. Blaine, the Cinnabar Island gym leader, is elderly and keeps his identity secret behind disguises earlier in the game. When you meet him in his gym, he has surrounded himself with fire and with a particular kind of isolated intensity. He is a scientist as well as a trainer. The Pokémon Mansion is on his island. He was, by proximity and professional association if nothing else, adjacent to the Mewtwo project. The theory suggests he was more than adjacent, that he may have participated, or at least knew enough to understand what was being done. The fire types are interesting in this context. Fire, in combat, has historically been the element of both destruction and defense, of scorched earth, of controlled burn, of the choices made when you need to ensure nothing useful is left for whoever comes next. The civilian population of Kanto provides additional layers. The abundance of young widows, women raising children alone, women who run shops and services and households without male partners, is too consistent to be accidental. The specific quality of grief in these characters, which the game does not dramatize but simply presents as background, is the grief of people who have processed their losses far enough to be functional but not far enough to be fully healed. They are not devastated. They are managed. They are living in the aftermath. The children of these households, the trainers you encounter on routes, in gyms, in the random battles of the game world, are being raised almost entirely by women and by elderly people. This has a specific quality to it. These children know how to fight. They are training Pokémon with a seriousness that goes beyond hobby. They are being prepared for something, or preparing themselves for something, in the way that children who grew up in the shadow of a recent catastrophe often become very serious about capability and self-sufficiency very early. The player character is one of these children. A kid from a mostly empty town, whose father is never mentioned, who sets out at 10 years old with no escort and no safety net into a world full of wild Pokémon and criminal organizations and the ruins of experiments gone wrong. This is not the behavior of a child from a stable, fully functioning society. This is the behavior of a child who was raised in a context where early competence was necessary, where adult protection was not reliably available, where learning to handle yourself was not optional. The world of Kanto is recovering. It has been recovering for a long time, and the children of the recovery are out in the tall grass, fighting, because that is what their world taught them to do. Expansion C. Ash's Dream. The emotional logic, the coma theory, when examined through the lens of what we know about how the brain responds to trauma and isolation, becomes more than a clever reinterpretation of cartoon aging conventions. There is a specific phenomenon documented in medical and psychological literature, sometimes called prolonged coma dreaming. The experience of patients in long-term coma or vegetative states who, upon recovery, report elaborate and internally consistent experiences that their brains constructed during the period of unconsciousness. These experiences often have specific features. They tend to be emotionally complete in ways that real experience rarely is. Problems get resolved. Relationships deepen. The dreamer progresses through challenges and grows. And crucially, they often involve repetition with variation. The same essential emotional challenge appearing in slightly different forms, over and over, as the unconscious mind continues to work on something it cannot fully process. Ash's journey is repetition with variation. He arrives in a new region. He meets new friends. He earns badges. He competes in a tournament and does not win, or wins and then faces a larger challenge. He loses or nearly loses something important and learns from the experience. He moves on. The next region begins. The structure is identical. The details change. The emotional core, the question of whether he is worthy, whether his bonds are real, whether he has what it takes, remains constant because it has never been fully answered. An unconscious mind working through a specific emotional injury does exactly this. It presents the same question in different contexts. It dresses the anxiety in different costumes and sends it at the dreamer from different directions. It does not stop until something resolves. And the theory argues that the resolution, the moment Ash finally becomes world champion, is the moment the processing completes. The Pikachu detail is worth expanding. In the specific literature of comfort objects and transitional objects in child psychology, the objects that children bond with during periods of stress or illness have a particular function. They bridge the gap between the self and the world, providing a stable presence when the world feels unsafe or inaccessible. The attachment to these objects is not irrational. It is the psyche's recognition that some things can be relied upon when most things cannot. If Pikachu is a real object in the real world, a toy, a drawing, a stuffed animal that a 10-year-old boy had with him when he fell in a field, then the fact that Pikachu is the one element of the dream that Ash never lets go of, never releases, never allows to be taken by Team Rocket no matter how many times they try, is the psyche's protection of its own anchor. The dreaming mind knows what it cannot afford to lose. It disguises the knowledge as narrative loyalty, as the story logic of a boy who loves his partner too much to give him up. But the real logic is simpler and more urgent. Let go of the thing that is keeping you here, and you might not find your way back. The companions also deserve more careful attention. The theory identifies Misty and Brock as representations of medical staff, but this identification is worth examining more specifically. Misty is immediate, present from the first moment, slightly combative in a way that reads less like hostility and more like the brisk efficiency of someone who needs you to cooperate with their process. She is associated with water, with the element that soothes and heals and conducts electricity. She leaves at a specific point in the journey, replaced by someone else, because the dreaming mind's model of whoever she represents has changed. Perhaps a nurse who finished her rotation, perhaps a doctor who left the case. Brock is stability. He is always there. He makes food and navigates practical logistics and provides the steady, warm, slightly exasperated care of someone who is present for the long term. He is the constant. He is the night nurse, perhaps, or the day shift caretaker who has been there since the beginning and who Ash's mind has translated into a best friend, because what he provides functions like friendship even if the real relationship is something more clinical. And Team Rocket keeps coming back because anxiety always comes back. You do not resolve anxiety once. You resolve it and then it returns, in a slightly different form, with a slightly different approach, still trying to take the thing you cannot afford to lose. They fail every time because the dreaming mind does not allow them to succeed. The dream is not a nightmare, it is a working through. And in a working through, the fear is present but manageable, confrontable, defeatable with sufficient effort. That is, ultimately, what the dream is for. Expansion D. Gengar, Clefable, and pairs across the world. The shadow pair concept that the Gengar-Clefable theory introduces is actually far more pervasive throughout the Pokémon franchise than the original theory's focus on this single pair suggests. The idea that certain Pokémon exist as natural counterparts, not as enemies, not as simple opposites, but as two expressions of the same fundamental form, runs throughout the design philosophy of the franchise in ways that become visible once you know what to look for. The most explicit version of this pairing principle appears in the legendary Pokémon design. Dialga and Palkia, the rulers of time and space, are not simply powerful Pokémon that happen to exist in the same game. They are designed as mirrors. Their sizes, their standing postures, their color schemes, even the diamond and pearl shapes embedded in their bodies, are each other's complement. They are not enemies. They are aspects of the same creative force, expressed through different dimensions. When you look at one and then the other, you are meant to feel that they are the same song played in two different keys. Ho-Oh and Lugia, the tower's guardians in the Johto games, present a more emotionally complex version of the pair. Ho-Oh burns with rainbow light and is associated with resurrection, with the return of life from death. Lugia moves through deep water and deep air and is associated with the quieting of storms, with the stilling of overwhelming force. One brings things back, one calms them down. They need each other in the way that intensity needs grace, in the way that a return needs a place of rest to return to. The Eon duo, Latias and Latios, are the most literally paired, a sister and a brother, similar in form, each possessing capabilities that complement rather than duplicate the others. They are the franchise's version of the matched pair as relationship, as the specific tenderness between creatures who are alike enough to understand each other and different enough to need each other. And then there is the most famous pair in the franchise, the one that the Valentine's Day graphic acknowledged. Gengar and Clefable, the shadow and the light, the cold and the warm, the mountaintop and the haunted room at the bottom of the tower. Both round, both mysterious, both associated with night in their different ways. Both, when you look at their silhouettes, unmistakably and perfectly, the same shape rendered in different materials. The theory has been extended, in some elaborations, to suggest that this pairing principle extends to the trainers as well, that Ash and Gary, competitors since birth, balanced against each other in every way, are a shadow pair of human children rather than Pokémon. That Misty and the Cerulean City Gym, built on beauty and performance, is the light to Brock and the Pewter City Gym's shadow, rock and stone, and the weight of responsibility. Whether you extend the theory this far, or keep it grounded in the specific case of Gengar and Clefable, the principle it identifies is real. The Pokémon world is built around duality in ways that are too consistent and too precise to be accidental. Light and shadow, cold and warm, the thing you can see clearly and the thing at the edge of your vision, the bright mountaintop and the dark room, They are the same shape. They have always been the same shape. One learns to live with being the shadow. The other never quite knows the shadow is there. Expansion E. The parasect horror, natural and unnatural. The real-world biology that underlies the parasect theory is worth examining in full, because the closer you look at Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, the more precisely it seems to describe what the Pokédex is actually saying about parasect. The fungus was first formally described in the scientific literature in the 19th century, but research into the full scope of its behavior, specifically into how it manipulates the behavior of its hosts, has accelerated significantly in recent decades. What researchers found, when they began examining the mechanism by which the fungus controls the ant's behavior, was something that revised earlier assumptions in a disturbing way. The initial assumption was that the fungus grew into the ant's brain and directly commandeered its motor systems from that central location. This is a tidy, understandable model, but it is not what happens. When researchers examined infected ants at the cellular level, they found that the fungal cells were distributed throughout the ant's entire body, not concentrated in the brain, not operating through any single central control point, but present in every muscle group, every joint, every tissue. The fungus does not take over the brain. It infiltrates every cell of the body simultaneously and operates the body like a puppet operated by 10,000 small hands, each one controlling a tiny portion of the movement. The brain of the infected ant remains, by most measures, functional. It is still receiving signals. It is still attempting to process information. The ant's nervous system is not destroyed. It is simply overridden at every point of execution. The brain says one thing and the body does another, because the body has been colonized at a level below the brain's authority. What this means, if you apply it to parasect, is considerably worse than the simpler version of the theory. The simpler version suggests that parasect's original consciousness is simply gone, replaced by the fungus, absent, no longer present in any way. This is horrifying, but clean. The creature ended, and something else began using its body. The more precise version, derived from the actual mechanism of Ophiocordyceps, suggests that the consciousness did not go anywhere. The brain of the paras is still there, inside the body of the parasect. It is still receiving signals. It is still attempting, at some level, to generate intention and direction. But every intention it generates is overridden at the muscular level. Every command is intercepted before it reaches execution. The paras is still in there, in the same way that the ant is still in there, fully present, fully aware, and completely unable to do anything with that awareness. This is why the eyes went blank. Not because the visual system stopped working, because the ability to express anything through the eyes, to have the facial expression register what the internal experience is, was one of the first things the fungus suppressed. The blank eyes are not absence. They are the face of something that is still present but can no longer communicate its presence. When you command parasect in battle, you are using a command system that is higher order than both the fungus and the trapped paras. You are the trainer, the external agent, and your commands create a priority structure that even the fungus responds to, because the fungus has some level of behavioral flexibility that allows it to respond to its environment. Your tackle or spore command gets executed not because the paras executed it, and not because the fungus spontaneously chose to, but because the fungus, as a biological system responsive to environmental stimuli, has learned that complying with commands is a useful behavior in the context of a trainer-Pokémon relationship. The paras inside the parasect watches itself fight. It watches itself use moves it chose to learn before the evolution, moves that it had some original relationship with. It cannot stop any of it. It cannot communicate. It cannot tell you that it is still there. The blank eyes are the most important detail in the entire theory. The designers could have given Parasect any eye design they wanted. They gave it blank white eyes. Not closed eyes, not angry eyes, not the dramatic red eyes of a possessed or evil creature. Blank, empty, communicating nothing. The face of something that has lost the ability to have a face. The games never comment on this. They never acknowledge what they showed you. They gave you a creature with pupils and then evolved it into a creature without them, and they did not say a word. Expansion F. N and Zoroark. The internal evidence. The N is a Zorro arc theory becomes considerably more compelling when you work through the internal emotional logic of the games, in addition to the physical and behavioral evidence. Getsis constructed N's entire psychology around a specific lie. The lie was this: N could hear Pokémon voices, understand their feelings directly, because he was special among humans, because he had been chosen, because his gift made him uniquely suited to be the person who would change the world's relationship with Pokémon. The lie is functional because it is built around something true. N can hear Pokémon voices. He does understand them directly, more completely and immediately than any human trainer could. The feelings he receives from Pokémon are not filtered through the limited empathy of a human nervous system. They arrive whole, in full, because N is receiving them through a Pokémon's perceptual system rather than a human one. Getsis took this true thing, N's genuine, direct, biological connection to Pokémon, and gave it a false frame. He told N it was a human gift rather than a Pokémon nature. He told N that this gift was the reason he was special, the reason he had a destiny, the reason his unusual history made sense. In doing so, he ensured that N would never investigate the truth of his own nature, would never ask the question that, if asked, would reveal what he actually was. The psychological sophistication of this manipulation is considerable for a children's game. Getsis identified the specific mechanism by which N's true nature could be concealed from him, make the most obvious evidence of that nature appear to be evidence of something else, and built an entire worldview around it. He gave N a philosophy, a cause, a community, an identity. He gave N the team plasma structure as a context in which his unusual perceptions made him not an anomaly, but a leader. He gave N every reason to believe what Getsis wanted him to believe, and no reason to question it. When Getsis says, at the end, that N has the heart of a Pokémon, when he says it with contempt, as a condemnation, using it to dismiss N's perspective as the perspective of something subhuman, the contempt reveals what the manipulation was always about. Getsis has always known what N is. He was never deceived. He found a Zoroark child, or arranged for a Zoroark child to come to him, and he raised it as a human because a human was what he needed for his plan. He needed a spokesperson, a face, an idealist who could look at the world and argue with genuine feeling that things were wrong and needed to change. He did not need a Pokémon. He needed a person. So he made N believe it was a person. The moment the illusion breaks, the moment Getsis's contempt strips away the last protection N had, the last reason to maintain the human self-concept, is one of the most emotionally charged moments in the franchise. Because what N experiences at that moment is not just betrayal, it is the sudden removal of the framework through which he understood himself. Everything about N's identity was predicated on being a human with a gift. If he is not a human, then the gift was not a gift. It was just biology. And the cause he fought for, the liberation of Pokémon from humans, was fought by a Pokémon pretending to be human, which makes the whole thing something different and stranger and more tragic than a simple story about a deceived idealist. N freed himself, in the end, by releasing his legendary Pokémon, by letting go of the most powerful external thing in his life, and riding into an unknown future on a horse that no one else can see, toward an answer he does not yet have. The answer, in the logic of the theory, is the one he has been running from since he was small enough to play with toys in a locked room in a castle. He is a Zoroark. He does not need to be anything else. Expansion G. Arceus and the Unknown. Language as physics. The theory that the unknown are Arceus's tools of creation is at its most compelling when you consider the specific capabilities attributed to the unknown in situations where many of them gather. In Pokémon Gold and Silver, the first games to introduce the unknown, they are found in the ruins of Alph, a system of chambers accessible from multiple directions throughout the Johto region. The ruins predate any human settlement. Nobody built them around the unknown. The unknown were there first, and the ruins are the structures that formed around the places they gather. What happens when enough unknown gather is documented in the games and expanded in the films. In the third Pokémon film, Spell of the Unknown, a child's grief, raw, intense, unprocessed, acts as a kind of amplifier for the unknown. The child wants her mother back. The unknown, present in sufficient number, begin responding to the emotional intensity of the wish. They do not evaluate it. They do not assess its practicality. They have one function, which is to manifest. And the presence of enough intention can activate that function. What they manifest is real. A crystalline structure surrounds an entire city. A Pokémon is created from the child's imagination. Reality is altered in ways that do not reverse themselves without significant effort. The unknown are not just symbols, they are active. They are responsive to concentrated meaning. The implication of the theory is that this is a diminished version of what they once did. In the beginning, in the cosmological beginning, when Arceus shaped the universe from nothing, the unknown were not responding to a child's grief. They were responding to something with considerably more power and intention. They were responding to the first and most fundamental act of meaning-making, the decision that something should exist. Language, in the most abstract philosophical sense, is the conversion of intention into form. You have a thought, an intention, a desire, a purpose, and you use language to give it a shape that can exist outside your own mind, that can be received by other minds, that can persist and propagate and generate consequences. Before language, intention stays inside. After language, it goes out into the world. Arceus had a thought. The thought was, there should be something, and it used the unknown, its 1,000 letters, its complete alphabet of possibility, to write the thought into reality. Time was written into existence. Space was written into existence. The boundary between them was written into existence. Everything that exists in the Pokémon world was, in this reading, a sentence, made of letters, made of unknown. And when the writing was done, the letters scattered. They found their way into the ruins and the rock chambers and the dark places where ancient things rest when they are no longer needed. They forgot what they had been. They became small and flat and individually weak, and they arranged themselves into patterns that looked like writing, because that is what they are. But the memory is still there. The Pokédex notes that when unknown are gathered in large numbers, strange things begin to happen. Reality becomes unstable. Perception and manifestation become difficult to separate. This is the mechanism of creation reasserting itself, briefly, incompletely, enough to power a grief child's wish or to fill a room with light when God comes to make something new. But the mechanism is there. The world is made of letters. The letters remember what they did. And somewhere, in the darkness of the ruins of Alph, they are still arranged in the shapes of the words that built everything. Expansion H. The multiverse and what it means for everything else. The confirmation of the Pokémon multiverse in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire does not just add a narrative feature to the franchise. It retroactively changes the meaning of every inconsistency, every removed feature, every scrapped mechanic, every detail that exists in one game, but not another. The original Red and Blue are set in a specific timeline. Gold and Silver are in the same timeline, a few years later. Fire Red and Leaf Green revisit that timeline. Heart Gold and Soul Silver revisit it again with additional content. These games all belong to one branch, what the official materials call the main timeline. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald belong to a different branch. The Hoenn games exist in a world that diverged at a specific point. A point, the theory suggests, at which Mega Evolution became possible through the presence of Megastones, a phenomenon that does not exist in the Kanto Johto branch. Whatever created the Megastone phenomenon, whatever event in the deeper history of the Pokémon world caused the specific geological and energy conditions that produced Mega Evolution, occurred in the Hoenn branch and not in the Kanto Johto branch. This is the moment of divergence. The implications for character relationships are fascinating. Ash, in the anime, visits Hoenn. He exists in a world where Mega Evolution eventually becomes accessible. But the anime Ash and the game protagonist are not the same individual. They exist in different representations of overlapping possibility spaces. The anime Ash's journey through Hoenn is a journey through a branch of reality that the game's main timeline protagonist never visited in quite the same way. Every region is both in the same world and in a slightly different world from every other region, depending on which timeline branch you follow. The people are the same, the Pokémon are largely the same, the geography is the same, but the history, the specific sequence of events that produce the present, diverges at points that the games have not always made explicit. The multiverse confirmation also means something specific for the fan theory tradition. Every theory that posits an alternative explanation for in-game events, a darker version, a more tragic version, a version that fills in the gaps differently, is describing a real branch, not a hypothetical, not an imagined alternative, a real branch of the multiverse, which the franchise itself has confirmed to be infinite. The Kubone who evolved into Kangaskhan in the branch where that evolutionary path was not removed. That Kubone exists. Somewhere in the infinite branching structure of the world, there is a Kubonin who grew up and became something else, and finally, after years of carrying the skull, was able to put it down. Not because the grief ended, but because it transformed into something that could carry more than grief. Something with a pouch of its own, and something in it that was warm and alive and needed protecting. The Ash who woke up, in whatever reading of his story you find most compelling, that Ash exists in a branch. The Ash who stayed asleep exists in another. The Pokémon world holds both of them. It holds every version of every story that has ever been told about it. This is, ultimately, the most generous possible architecture for a beloved fictional world. It says, every story you have told about this place is real, somewhere. Every theory is true in some branch. Every question has an answer, even if that answer lives in a part of the multiverse that no game will ever map. The world is large enough for everything. That has always been the promise of the tall grass. That has always been what the professor was trying to protect you from, rushing into without preparation. Not danger, vastness. Expansion 1, Lavender Town, the real music and the real response. The music of Lavender Town deserves more careful examination than most discussions give it, because the genuine musicological analysis of what makes it unsettling is actually more interesting than the fictional explanation the creepypasta provides. The original Lavender Town theme, composed by Junichi Masuda for the Japanese release of Pocket Monsters Red and Green in 1996, uses a specific harmonic structure that is unusual even within the broader context of the game's soundtrack. The piece is built around a tritone, an interval of augmented fourth or diminished fifth, depending on how you approach it, that has a history in Western music as the most dissonant and uncomfortable interval available within the standard 12-tone system. The tritone was called diabolus in musica in medieval European music theory, the devil in music. It was actively avoided in liturgical composition because its sound was considered spiritually disruptive, and composers who used it did so deliberately to create tension that needed to be resolved. The specific character of the tritone, the way it seems to pull in two directions simultaneously, to be almost stable without ever quite arriving at stability, creates a listening experience that the nervous system registers as incomplete, as unresolved, as waiting for something that does not come. Lavender Town's theme uses this interval in a context where no resolution is offered. The melody does not arrive at its tonic. It circles. It suggests arrival and then delays it, circles back, suggests it again. Listening to it is the musical equivalent of standing at the edge of a step that is not quite there. Your body prepares for a landing that does not happen, and the preparation itself becomes a kind of low-grade sustained stress. This is not accidental. Junichi Masuda is a sophisticated composer who understood exactly what he was doing when he wrote music for A Graveyard Town. He wanted you to feel uncomfortable. He wanted the music to tell you, before any of the narrative did, that this was not a place like the other places, that something different was happening here, that the normal rules, the upbeat momentum, the forward energy of the root themes, did not apply. The Japanese and Western versions of the music are different, and this difference is real and documented. The Japanese version includes higher-pitched elements that were adjusted in the Western release, specifically because of concerns about the Game Boy speaker. The adjustment was not motivated by any awareness of harm. It was motivated by the practical reality that the Game Boy's tiny mono speaker distorted high frequencies in ways that made certain tones uncomfortable to listen to, not because of any special frequency, but because of the speaker's physical limitations interacting with the intended sound. The Western version had these elements softened to compensate. The creepypasta took this real documented localization decision and constructed a story around it. The story is false. The decision was pragmatic, but the story is constructed so well and built so precisely around the genuine unsettling quality of the music and the genuine historical reality of the localization that it has the texture of truth, even though the substance is not there. This is worth noting because it illustrates something important about the broader fan theory tradition. The best fan theories, like the best urban legends, are built around real things. The Great War theory is built around the real absence of adult men in the game world. The Ditto Mu theory is built around the real shared statistics and the real location data. The Lavender Town Syndrome legend is built around a real piece of music that genuinely causes discomfort and a real localization change that is documented. The fictional explanation is false, but it is constructed from real materials. This is also true of every creation myth in human history. Every myth that explains why the sky is blue, or why people die, or where the first fire came from, is constructed from real observations. The blueness of the sky, the reality of death, the existence of fire, wrapped in a narrative that makes those real things meaningful by placing them in a story. The story may be false. The materials are not. The Pokémon fan theory tradition is not so different from the tradition of mythology that it fails to be recognizable as part of the same human impulse. We see things. We find them strange or powerful or sad. We build stories that explain them. The stories tell us something about the things, and something about ourselves, and something about what it means to be the kind of creature that needs the world to make sense. Expansion. J. What all these theories have in common, it is worth spending some time, near the end of an evening like this one, on the question of what all of these theories share, not the content. The content varies enormously, from the statistical analysis of Ditto's shared weight with Mew, to the emotional reading of Blue standing silent in a graveyard, from the biological horror of Parasec's blank eyes to the multiverse confirmation that every possibility is real somewhere. The content is as varied as the people who made these theories, and as varied as the parts of the Pokémon world they were responding to. What they share is the recognition that the world of Pokémon was built with care and with intention, and that the intention goes deeper than what is visible on the surface. Every one of these theories begins with a creator who took the time to put something specific into the world. The designers who made Ditto share a weight and a stat total with Mew. Someone made a deliberate choice. The person who wrote Kubone's Pokédex entry in a way that made the grief specific and particular and real, that was deliberate. The composer who used a tritone in Lavender Town's theme, deliberate. The writer who gave Lieutenant Surge his one line about the war, deliberate. The programmer who drew Paras with pupils and Parasect without them, deliberate. All of these choices were made by people who were building something. People who were thinking, when they made these choices, about what they were communicating, about what kind of world they were making, and what that world should feel like from the inside. They were not making a simple, bright, uncomplicated toy for children. They were making something with weight, something with history, something that had shadows in it, because they understood that the best worlds are the ones that have shadows. And then they released it into the hands of children who grew up and could not quite let the world go, who carried it with them into adulthood and discovered, when they looked at it again with adult eyes, that there was more there than they had been able to see when they were small. That the shadows they had sensed without understanding were real, that the world had been talking to them the whole time, and they were finally old enough to understand what it was saying. The fan theory tradition is the documentation of that understanding. It is a generation of people writing down what they hear when they listen carefully to a world they have loved for most of their lives. It is, in the fullest sense of the word, a kind of scholarship, imperfect, non-academic, wildly varied in quality and rigor, but animated by genuine love and genuine attention and the genuine desire to understand. There is one more thing these theories share that is worth naming directly, because it is the thing that makes them matter beyond their specific claims. Every one of them is about loss. The Ditto Mew theory is about failed becoming, about a creature that lost the possibility of its own development. The Kubone Kangaskhan theory is about a child who lost a mother. The Great War theory is about a world that lost a generation. The coma theory is about a boy who may have lost his waking life. Blue's Raticate is about the first time a proud young person loses something they did not know they could lose. Gengar and Clefable are about a shadow that lost its original, or perhaps about a light that lost the shape it cast. Parasect is about a creature that lost itself. N is about a being that lost its identity before it had a chance to know what it was. The Pokémon world, underneath its brightness, is organized around loss, around the question of what survives when the thing you loved is gone. Whether a child with an oversized skull can grow into something that can put it down. Whether a world recovering from catastrophe can build something better from the pieces. whether a dream can be both an escape and a healing, and whether waking from it means losing everything it gave you. These are not small questions. These are the questions. The ones that every human being who lives long enough eventually has to face. And the Pokémon world has been holding them, carefully, in the spaces between gym battles and rival encounters and the long, quiet routes through the tall grass, for 30 years. The creators put them there because they understood something important. Children need to be given the world's full weight eventually. Not all at once, not without gentleness. But eventually, the softness has to open onto something real. And the best thing you can do for a child is give them a world that contains the real thing in a form they can approach on their own terms, at their own pace, guided by curiosity rather than fear. The tall grass is full of things that can hurt you. That has always been true. The professor knows it, the mother knows it, the rival, arrogant and speed-running, knows it in the way that the young and overconfident know things they have not yet paid the price for understanding. But you go in anyway. You go in with your starter Pokémon and your half-prepared bag, and you find out what is there, and you learn what it costs to be in that world, and you grow. And you carry everything you find, every theory, every grief, every blank eye and missing father and dead Raticate and child in a stolen skull. You carry it with you through the game and out the other side, into the rest of your life. That is what Pokémon was always for. Not the catching, not the collecting, not the 100 hours of grinding and the perfectly optimized stats and the championship belt. Those things are real too, and they have their own joy. But underneath all of it, the weight of a world that trusted you enough to put real things inside it. That believed from the very beginning that you were the kind of person who would eventually ask the right questions. You are. You always were.